So thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Uh, Now, if you're seeing this on Twitch, and I haven't been doing this since Tuesday last week, so 10 days ago, 11 days ago, if you're watching this on YouTube, the previous video was uploaded right at the same time, and it's just been a longer lull. It's just a lot of follow-up related to our transit costs project. Also the topic of the previous video was a little Q&A on that. It's transitcosts.com. You can go read the final report. It is long. You can read sections of the report by going to cases, I think. Includes the executive summary, which is essentially the synthesis of all the cases combined. I'm pretty sure that when I call it synthesis, there's zero English, it's synthèse, but at any rate, we're not going to talk about construction costs that much today, except insofar as they informed the rest of the analysis. Rather, we're going to talk about my next project, which is high-speed rail. Now, I have talked about it on video many times. I think I've done some. I think I've literally just done preliminary project management for it on stream or something like that. I forget when, sometime last year. Now. So I'm not going to do that again, but I'm going to drill into the issue of different alternatives, and essentially whether alternatives are done on a piecemeal basis or in bundles. Now, there was something that was done for the, I think, NEC Future project, which I slagged on because the project is just not very good. So the idea was that at the time, I think it was 2017. Where can I find it? There was something called Alternative 1, Alternative 2, Alternative 3 for the Northeast Corridor Future. Northeast Corridor Future, maybe? It's not the privatization bit, which is... Oh, it's this one. Yeah, oh, it's 2015 already. They were already doing that. So, what they did at the time was they came up with these three alternatives, numbered 1, 2, and 3, for what to do with the Northeast Corridor intercity rail improvements. And they were bundles based on speed and service level. So Alternative 1 was small upgrades, Alternative 2 was more upgrades. This is essentially what they picked for the cost of $117 billion. Alternative 3, I think, was almost 300 and was the only one providing true high-speed rail. I don't remember the exact trip times. I think Alternative 2 was 5.5 hours from Washington to Boston, maybe 5 hours. 5 hours would be about the maximum speed that you can get out of a legacy line. So, for example, the trains that are not on new high-speed tracks at all between Stockholm and Gothenburg, or Stockholm and Malmö, London and Leeds, London and York, London and Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool. These are all 130 to 140 kilometers an hour average speed. I think maybe if you go to a junction station that's not an urban terminal, like something like Crewe or Preston, you even hit 150, but what matters is speed not to Crewe or Preston, but to Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, York, places, like substantial secondary cities. I think that's on the order of 140 kilometers an hour, so that's Boston to DC in 5 hours and change, maybe in 5 hours 10. And that's Alt 2, basically. Alt 3 was, I think, 3 hours 30 for $300 billion, which is an insane cost. The project that I'm currently doing is essentially how to give something like that. So I think the trip times that I'm eyeing are about 3:30 Boston to DC for 20 something. And so Alt 1, Alt 2, and Alt 3 are distinguished by speed, and so essentially there were bundles, and what I mean by bundle is in different locations they could have had things that were faster and more expensive, or cheaper and slower. So as an example, New York to New Haven, this is the most painful of the segments. It is the one with the highest current commuter rail traffic, The second highest would be New York to Trenton, but New York to Trenton is a straighter line with fewer intermediate stops, so it's easier to. Certainly now it's easier to blend the trains together because there's just because they all have to drop down to two tracks between Jersey and Manhattan until Gateway opens. Here they don't have that problem. And it's also a very curvy line. So a lot of questions about, do you do bypasses? Do you bypass this? Do you not just do a little bypass, but do you bypass the area entirely? These can be folded into the Alt 1, Alt 2, Alt 3 schema. And quite a lot of people incorrectly propose to bypass this section. I don't mean doing little bypasses, I mean doing big bypasses. The trend design plan was to go via the LARR main line and then build a tunnel beneath the Long Island Sound. This has been also the proposal of I think the RPA in New York, the Regional Plan Association. There are two RPAs right now. There's Regional Plan Association, it's a New York outfit, and there's something called the Rail Passengers Association, which I think used to be called Association of Rail Passengers, ARP, which is a US-wide advocate outfit and is very different. I mean, the New York RPA, and there's something called North Atlantic Rail, which is essentially by former RPA head Bopiaro, which again, the idea is to bypass entirely with the tunnel under the Sound. Again, ridiculous, don't do that. But that would be something you do in Alt 3, or I think the proposal they had, the official one, was not to do this, but to go inland with lots and lots of tunneling through the hills of Westchester and the suburbs, not on Gold Coast, but behind it, to go via Danbury and Waterbury. So, and the point is that the idea was always that you would do either Alt 1 or Alt 2 or Alt 3. You would never do something like, maybe you do an Alt 2 or Alt 3 level investment level, let's say between New Haven and Providence, and then you would drop down to Alt 1 between New York to New Haven on a basis of cost per minute saved. They did not do that, and this is, I think, the fatal mistake in that. Wait, people are asking me questions. So 330 can be done for 20 billion? I believe so, yes. I mean, it requires very good timetabling, but when I say very good timetabling, I mean something that a very small number of tech people who are also rail fans, or rail people who are also good at coding, can generate, because the whole point is you learn from Switzerland, and Switzerland does not have high-speed rail because it's a small country. If it were a bigger country, I imagine they would do high-speed rail. And what you do is you integrate infrastructure with timetable, so you make sure to put all the railroads on the same clock face timetable. You timetable local and express trains to where you need bypasses, build bypasses. For example, between Boston and Providence, the 2-track line with strategic bypasses. Now, I'm asked about whether how much of that is quad-tracked about New York to New Haven. The line is practically entirely quad track. I don't actually remember whether they've finished quad tracking everything or whether there's a triple track narrow section in, I think, through Milford and New Haven. We can check. And but quad tracking is already on the list if it is not already done. Okay, this looks like a triple track, but you can kind of maybe see that they're already prepping space for the 4th track. So this should not be a very difficult project if it is necessary. I don't actually know if it is necessary. I haven't yet done the work of timetabling everything together between Stamford and New Haven. I've done some preliminaries, Stamford to New York, which is harder. The issue with Stamford to New York being harder is that it is a 4-track corridor that needs 3 speed classes, which are local commuter, express commuter, and intercity. Right now, this is handled in the most brutal way possible to intercity rail riders. The intercity trains are slowed down to the speed of an express commuter train. Again, these aren't people who are very good at coordinated timetabling, and this is the result. How much? Okay. Oh, the court. Good question. As far as I can tell, it's entirely overbuilding and agency turf models. It is not. So it's hard to say because there has also cropped up an American coast problem more recently, where, for example, one of the items that is needed used to be non-negotiable, but the costs have exploded to the point that it should be negotiable, is new tunnels through Baltimore. The Baltimore tunnels, there's actually a really good FRA document about this that I'm going to try to dig up. It's called, I don't remember when this doc is from, maybe 2008? Yeah, I don't want this one. I want, or the record of the, or record of decision. Okay, maybe this. So there's a study that the FRA made in the late 2000s, which was very interesting about the history of this. Essentially, these tunnels. So there are two tunnels to Baltimore, BNP, which are historically Penn, the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Howard Street, historically Baltimore and Ohio, currently CSX. The issue is that this is not a very good environment for rail building in the technology of the 19th century. You might be able to even to tell just by the shape of how things look like on Google Earth. This is not a coastal plain. There's a little bit of a coastal plain, but it was already developed at the time. This area was really difficult to get across, to the point that in the Civil War there were no routes, there were no steam rail routes through Baltimore. There were tracks in the middle of the street pulled by horses. Union troops needed to guard them as the city was loyal to the Confederacy due to its role as one of the two most important ports exporting slave-produced cotton, the other being New York, which was also infamous for its draft riots and its pro-Confederate mayor. In general, the most pro-Union parts of the North were not New York, they were the Midwest, and on the East Coast it was Boston and Philadelphia. Less commercially tied to the slave trade, to do the slave, not slave trade, there was no slave trade, but 1860, to the slave production system. And so it took longer to build, it took, not longer, it took later to build these two tunnels. Again, compromised alignments, very slow than it took to build the transcontinental railway. Between Omaha and I don't think it went to San Francisco. I think it went to just Oakland or Emeryville. So replacing these tunnels is a priority. These are very slow tunnels because, again, bad construction environments with 1860s, 70s technology to railroads that loathed each other and did not ever cooperate. So they built separate alignments rather than coordinating on some kind of union station. I believe the American Union Station movement was a generation later, so if it had been the 1890s maybe, but not in the 1860s, 70s. And so, there are proposals to quad track, and I did actually mention that in a previous video where I was essentially trying to talk about sharing commuter and intercity trains on the same tracks. Not sharing, blending them so they can share the same tracks away from the New York region. And yeah, Baltimore to Washington is a thing where you need, I don't think you need to quad track the whole thing, you need to quad track things, but again, older video. But yeah, you're right that this is a priority. These are very slow tunnels. And somehow the cost of doing so exploded to $4 billion. Maybe I've even seen higher numbers, I don't remember. It was supposed to be two tracks just for electric intercity trains, and then they scope crept, and then they descoped back to what I just said, two tracks for intercity electrics, and some of the costs stayed high. This is an American cost problem. Bear in mind, they can fix the procurement. That's not a big deal. I mean, it does require people to run this program to be not the people currently running the program, but that's also true of several other things. Like, this is a problem that to a large extent fixes itself if you fix the agency tariff problems. So I'm less worried about costs. And yeah, you're right, the New Haven line is run very poorly. The LIR and Metro North, each of them thinks the other is extremely poorly run. They're both correct. It's a very common problem with American mainline rails. They all hate one another. But anyway, and essentially each one thinks the others are incompetent, and they're largely correct. But anyway, it's not about that. It's about this kind of alternatives. And I mentioned when I was pitching this video on social media and on Discord. Does Discord count as social media? I don't know, but Twitter, Fetty, Discord. That's where I advertise these. And so it's about capacity planning. Now, the importance of capacity planning is that I don't think it is correct to do alternatives based on speed unless you're very carefully matching the costs per minute saved. If you're matching cost per minute saved, then yes, you can calibrate that. However, and I emphasize this, generally the costs per minute saved don't lend themselves to this kind of alt 1, alt 2, alt 3 type analysis. It's usually just one alt. The thing is, the cost per minute saved that you should accept on the Northeast Corridor is larger than the cost of just making this a high-speed line. 20 billion for this has an extremely high benefit cost ratio. I'm not gonna go ahead and do this estimation because I won't say there are people who do this for a living. I mean, I do this for a living, but I'm gonna do this for a living later than now, because whether the BCR is 4 or 6 or 8 is immaterial for the current state of the project. And so I think what is important, however, when you do this kind of alt 1, alt 2, alt 3 analysis, is to think in terms of capacity. Why? Because it might well be the case that it is justifiable to build, let's say, the section between New Haven and Kingston. This is the issue of New Haven to Kingston, which I've mentioned many times, but I just want to mention it again so that everyone is on the same page, regardless of whether you've been looking at everything I've done for so many years or whether you're a new person like Flyer Fanatic. Welcome to the stream, by the way. Mark okay, it's not Mark still uses diesel. Mark de-electrified. The Mark pen line used to be electric, and because of Amtrak extraction problems, they went to diesel locomotives. But anyway, so you're welcome. Anyway, so the issue with New Haven to Kingston is that here the line is at its curviest. It's actually curvier east of New Haven than west of New Haven. It's just that there's much less commuter rail traffic, and Amtrak owns this line, so it doesn't slow down its own trains. So this is a rather a curvy section. However, whereas New York New Haven, I keep referring to it as a world of pain, there's much less suburban development here. And I-95 is rather straight, so what you can do is string a line on I-95, and I even have an alignment. It's rather aggressive to start in the city and not do this curve and then go, but the cost of this essentially need another bridge deck, but that's what, 100 million, 200 million. I think it justifies the cost of bypassing this shit. Then you go then you go next to I-95. I think on the north side is better, and then what you do, and essentially the only urban shit you need to deal with is in New London, and then you transition back to the right-of-way in southern Rhode Island, around here. This is a new right-of-way that you need to carve. You can literally check what the right-of-way crosses, and it is almost entirely undeveloped. It's maybe you need to go through a house or two. You might even be able to to go around them. The grades here are substantial, but nothing that high-speed trains can't do. Nothing here has substantial conservation value, so not actually hard to carve this new right-of-way. It's possible that you might want to be very fast here, but then completely give up on New York New Haven, just on a matter of just on a cost per minute saved basis. I don't think this is the right choice. I think you do need at least some bypasses on New York New Haven, or even you can mix New York New Haven. I mean, so with New York New Haven, what I think they should do, and again, this is lower level of certainty, is 3 deviations from the right-of-way. The first deviation is around Ryan Portchester. This is a rather curvy section. This is also useful in that this is, as I mentioned, New York to New Haven is 4 tracks with 3 stopping patterns. This is essentially a good bypass for intercity trains to overtake express commuter trains. It would require express commuter trains to also serve Greenwich, which they currently don't, but that's not that big a deal because Greenwich is a very popular reverse commuter stop. And also Portchester is a good stop to stop. And so it slightly slows down the express commuter trains, but that's not a big deal. If anything, the express commuter trains might on that to be sped up if the timetabling is more stable and therefore can be done with less schedule padding, which is substantial on this line. I've seen trains that were timetabled to do Stamford to New York to the city nonstop in 50 minutes, do it in maybe 40 and a bit. Maybe 43 is the lowest that they definitively remember. It might have been less. So there's that deviation. There's a deviation through Darien, and there's actually I said through Darien. I meant 4. There's a little deviation around Fairfield, little bypass, and then a much more substantial one around Bridgeport and Stratford. You can pick and choose. You might not need to do all 4. Probably the most important is Rye Portchester, just because of the Rye Portchester Greenwich, just because of the capacity issue. Like there's a much bigger capacity crunch here than east of Stamford, where you can just have 2 tracks intercity, 2 tracks express commuter. I mean, Amtrak as it presently is run should not take over anything, but all of these are reformable. Like all of these are railroads where you actually can put someone competent in charge. It's just not going to be someone who's ever run an American railroad because these people don't know how competent railways are run, but it's fine. Hire Germans. Like that's not actually that big a deal. And yeah, no, New York Grand Central should not be New York's main high-speed rail station. And the reason is that the Penn Station to Grand Central Link is too useful for commuter trains. That you probably want to have all capacity given to commuter trains. That's the first issue. And the second issue is that the way out of Grand Central involves the Park Avenue line, which is fine. But is that it's a 4-track line, so you would dedicate 2 of them to intercity trains. But then Harlem is a stop where all of the commuter trains should be stopping, non-negotiable. Too important to skip it on the central tracks or something. But then the intercities should be skipping it, and so essentially you're creating another problem. Now, it is a problem where I live. It is a problem that I think Steffi pointed out on my Discord, where I think where it's not going to be possible for me to point this out on Google, but I can point this out on Open Railway Map. I hope. The issue is that there are 4 tracks through Berlin Hauptbahnhof going north-south, but they're not segregated as 2 intercity to regional. The way they're split, and you might be able to track this through this route. So there are 8 platform tracks on each approach track. That's the correct way to do it whenever possible. And the way these 4 approach tracks work is because the way these junctions work is that 2 tracks lead east toward Gesundbrunnen and 2 west toward to Jungfernheide and points west. Now, this is a valuable stop for regional trains, but intercities should be skipping it, so that's already a little bit of friction. And then you go south, and that assignment persists. So, and so you're getting into the problem where it is non-negotiable. Every regional train should be stopping at Potsdamer Platz, and no intercity train should. So it's not really possible to have 2 independent 2 tracks that are only used by intercities and 2 tracks that are only used by regionals. And because intercities, most of the intercities are going to go to points west. You might have some going to Gesundbrunnen if there is just more demand south and north. But you do also need regional trains from Spandau on this alignment. So this is somewhat of a problem for capacity planning in Berlin. And if you make Grand Central your high-speed rail terminal in New York, then you're essentially imposing that same problem on New York, where you don't need it. You don't need that problem. In New York, you can arrange things that with so going east, you can arrange things so that at no point do the intercities need to deal with slower trains. So I mean, I guess the example is I think that there should be a Sunnyside Junction station here and maybe another Sunnyside station here, but you can have bypass tracks for intercities. And essentially, other than this station-free section on Hellgate Bridge, you can always make sure that you don't have stations on constrained sections. You just do just 4-track parts of this. It's already, to a large extent, being done for Penn Station access. And then to the west, it's 2 tracks, so it doesn't matter. But with Gateway, you can you're not going to initially segregate high-speed trains onto separate tracks. We are going to get to that a little bit. We're going to talk about alternatives and capacity planning. Remember, always the top. Remember, it takes me a while to get to the topic, but I get to the topic. But with Gateway, with just Gateway, I imagine the way it works is one tunnel goes to the northeast corridor, including intercities, but also regionals, and the other goes to the Mars and Essex lines. I imagine also Montclair Boonton. Not 100% sure, but probably the Montclair Boonton would go to this would go to the new tunnel and not to Hoboken. The Raritan Valley line, even though it goes through Newark Penn and not Newark Broad, it should be treated as if it's Newark Broad for the purpose of what tunnel to use. But it also doesn't really share much infrastructure with intercities. So by the time the intercities and the regionals differ, there already is more infrastructure for them. There's already for example, Newark Penn to Point South is minimum 4 tracks. Sections have 6 tracks sometimes. So anyway, okay, how America about electrification? I don't know. Oh, I imagine that you would just transfer at Penn Station. You can also have pinch trains like at Leipzig or Frankfurt, where trains enter the station then reverse, but probably people will just transfer at Penn Station. That's pretty normal for people to transfer when you have a main station. Essentially, yeah, that's the issue with electrification. The other issue is that by the 1970s already, the American rail network was in such bad shape that essentially the only thing it was even capable of doing was very low value goods. Passenger rail was basically dead by then. And remember in the 1970s, Amtrak was great in 1971 before the oil crisis. And as far as I remember, Amtrak's not by passenger ridership, but passenger miles, I guess, was basically stable throughout Amtrak's existence, I guess, until Corona. There was an increase in ridership, which, I mean, a long-term trend in which there was more ridership on the Northeast Corridor and some higher investment state corridors that are relatively short range, like in California or in maybe Michigan or Virginia. Or I guess the Cascades, but less ridership on the night trains. And any electrification would have to be paired with probably for the freight. Honestly, you would need to nationalize probably. You would need to nationalize, and this is really difficult because how do I feel about free transit? Don't do it. You have you're leaving too much money on the table if you don't get tired of it. But yeah, you don't need to transfer. You can if you throw on, but the most important thing to throw on from DC is Boston. Trains north to Albany are less important. And it's fine for people to transfer. People do transfer at complex intercity rail networks. So I'm not saying it's no value in throw-running. There's false. There is value in throw-running, but there's no. But the value of throw-running is not infinite. Not in this case. So yeah, the problem is you need to nationalize the freight railroad. I might actually video about this one at some point. And by at some point I mean when I get into the same room with Uday Schultz. But it would need to be let's call it developmental nationalization, so not labor nationalization, where you promise that the really high staffing levels will remain. So you need to nationalize and then do what European railroads do and don't have two people in the cab, just one. You invest in higher service levels. You timetable better. So in addition to the fact that you need the mass layoff because there's severe overstaffing, but the workers will remain. Get holidays, like they get clear timetables. They don't have a constantly on call schedule as they do today. That's what I mean by developmental nationalization. So anyway, the importance of the capacity point is that you absolutely can separate alternatives by how much capacity you're providing, and the reason is that, yeah, maybe it's valuable to be fast here and slow here. But if on some section you're limiting yourself to, let's say, a train every 15 minutes, there's no point in building capacity for more than a train every 15 minutes on other sections. I mean, maybe there's some kind of future-proofing issue, but you denote in the plan where the future-proofing is. Essentially, you're saying, this is what we need for a train every 15 minutes between New York and Washington. This is what we need for a train every 10, a train every 7.5, a train every 5. Yeah, maybe you don't go consistent. Maybe you're not consistent because some sections are just freebies, right? I mean, so for example, the question about the Baltimore and Potomac tunnel replacement, this is roughly the alignment that is proposed for the replacement. It's called the Great Circle Tunnel. I think there's a little bit of an inaccuracy. I think maybe the actual circle is a little bit wider, I'm not sure. But this is the approximate alignment of the proposed replacement. This is why it's a deviation from the current route. This is not really a capacity question. This is something that you should do, but I don't think it matters terribly to how frequent you're going to make the trains run, because it's going to be for both intercities and regionals, and the speed difference is not going to be much. It's not going to be a high-speed section anyway. I think it's maximum 160 kilometers an hour. I don't think it could do 200 with this curvature. And there are no tunnels. Sorry, there are tunnels. Sorry, I meant there are no stations between Baltimore Penn and West Baltimore, and West Baltimore is already outside of the tunnel. So this is essentially a freebie on capacity. So I don't mean every item is about capacity. Some items are unrestricted. Some items. So actually, while we're already hovering on this, how much infrastructure to build between Baltimore and Washington depends on the frequency that you're planning on running. If you're running a train every 15 minutes, you might even be able to do it on the current section. The current line is predominantly triple track with I think there's like maybe one quad track section. And if you're planning on running every 10 minutes, you need much more extensive quad tracking. And anything more than that, you would need everything to be four track. And now in all cases, by the way, I need to stress something. Build capacity in the most advanced way, and by most advanced I mean electronics before concrete. What does this mean? Re-electrify this. I mean the tracks are electrified, but run electrics on the Penn line. Don't de-electrify. Likewise, Boston to Providence currently runs diesel locomotives and always has. The electrification was exclusively for intercity trains, and there are very short sections, to wit, the yard here through Pawtucket, the 4-track bypass in Attleboro. This is a 2-track line, but here you have 4 tracks. So the local tracks at Attleboro, they are not electrified. It's a piece of cake to electrify them. It's very short. You can tap the existing substations. You might need to do some substation expansion because the trains are going to draw more power if there are more of them, but there's actually space for expanding the substation. It was built to be future-proof in the 1990s. This is an example of future-proofing. If I'm saying something like, it depends on the substation capacity that you need, you want to build the substations with space for expansion based on future capacity needs. This is an example of future-proofing. if you really want, you can reuse the BNP tunnels for local commuter service, but this is one of these if the intercities run every 5 minutes. Oh, you're asking if they should re-electrify? Yeah, I expect so, but um, it's mostly the main reason you want to do this. So why would you do 25 kilovolt AC? I don't actually know if they mentioned the electrification beta. You can see how little electrification there is in the United States. The United States might actually be the least electrified intercity rail network in the I mean, the United States might actually be the least electrified national railway network that is not literally zero like Canada. I think it's something like 1% or less than 1%. So yellow. So this yellow is the is 11 kilovolts, 25 hertz. This is 11 kilovolts, or I think 12 kilovolts, maybe 16, not 16, 60 hertz, and this is the international standard 25 kilovolts, 60 hertz. This is the standard. The main reason you want to do 60 hertz and not 25 hertz is that the size of the transformer on board the train is inversely proportional to the frequency. So Germany electrifies with not 17, 15 kilovolts, 16 and 2/3 hertz, whereas the more standard high voltage electrification in Europe is not 16 and 2/3 but 50 hertz. I mentioned 60 is the international standard. The international standard is actually 25 kilovolts and either 50 or 60 hertz depending on the local frequency. Japan actually is partly 50, partly 60 because different grids in the same country. And so because of that, the trains in Germany, the electric trains in Germany require transformers on board the trains that are 3 times as large as in France, which is 50 hertz territory. And this is actually seen in slightly higher massive train adapted to the German market than to the French market. Now, in general, German trains are lighter than French ones in regional service because essentially they're more modern. But when you take the same product, like the Pendolino, and you expect it to run in multiple countries, it gets heavier for AC service in France and even heavier for AC service in Germany. Now, the difference in voltage is mostly how much power you can draw, but the difference between 11 kilovolts and 25 kilovolts, it's real. If you can change that, then go ahead. But it is a very minor difference. Nothing like the power limitations that you're dealing with in places like Italy and I think the Netherlands, which in 3,000 or 1.5 thousand even worse volt DC territory. So yeah, they should do this, but not at every cost. There was a proposal to quad-track BWI. Yeah, they should probably rebuild BWI. Of course, rebuild it as a normal commuter rail station, not as a fancy thing with fancy architecture and way too much space for surplus extraction. Oh, it's 1.5, not 3. Yeah. You know, Rutte is an asshole, but I live in Germany. There are worse assholes than Rutte. For example, Merz. And then, there's the entire extreme right. So, yeah, Rutte is bad, but I mean, let's put things in perspective. And anyway, so the importance of capacity planning is you do need to think what you need for various levels of capacity. And again, remember, everything is about the integration of infrastructure and operating planning. So, how if anything, I would start from New York and go south. Like New York to New Haven is probably where I would first do it, just because of just to eliminate 1 voltage. And also, there's already, you might be able to tell, some of the electrification in Jersey is actually 25 kilovolts, 60 hertz. The reason I'm saying start with New York New Haven is that these trains are designed to run on both this and this, but they can't run on this, as far as I remember. And then there are trains that can, and then the trains in New Haven can easily run on this and this, but can't run on lower frequency, and the reason is that, as I said, you need bigger transformers, and so those trains, the M8s, are so heavy that they were trying to make the transformers big enough for 25 hertz, but they couldn't. So they, as a compromise, made them only big enough for 60 hertz, with the understanding that the trains can, in theory, run to Boston. They can run at any voltage, but they can't run on lower frequency. So, as a matter of running them, it's not being the greatest rolling stock, but being passable, it's valuable to to make this at least 60 hertz, so they can go like this. Or better yet, do it this way, because it's not going to be much more convenient to throw on this. And then likewise here, they also have 25 kilovolts. It's kind of weird which parts are, like the newer electrification. So this is it is in the more standard voltage. This, by the way, used to be 3000 volt DC. They re-electrified it like this. I'm forgetting when. Maybe 1980s. Oh, New Jersey Transit has trains that can do all of them. Oh, okay. Because I thought that like some trains that there were these trains that could be modified, but only in the shop or something. Oh, it's the arrows. Okay. So it's the trains where the locomotives can do everything, but the EMUs can't. Okay, that's what I remember. You need to do some clever modifications, but it's not that big a deal. So the static clearances required are approximately 1 centimeter per kilovolt. The German standard is 15 centimeters static clearance to a 15 kilovolt wire, and 27 to 25 kilovolt. 25 centimeters to 25 kilovolts. The British standard, I believe, is 20 centimeters. The American standard is 1 foot. Remember, American standards on mainline rail are basically worthless. So if it's safe in Britain and in Germany, it's safe. There's also something called surge arresters, which is a British invention for what to do when you're trying to wire high voltage in an extremely restricted setting, much more restricted than anything in the United States. Like, we're talking, I think, a meter lower. Not even a foot, a meter lower. And with arch bridges, so there might be room for the wire but not for the pantograph. So essentially Britain had to do a lot of bridge modifications, leading to higher costs independently of any kind of UK cost premium. And this is the first thing. And the second thing is they invented the surge arrestor, which essentially makes sure that the line is not going to arc, and when you have a surge arrestor, the static clearance to high voltage AC is reduced to the same as low voltage DC. Essentially, it gains you enough space. So you can do this. Yeah, if they're already a foot, then they don't need any modding. But anyway, so the issue is with capacity planning, because again, the capacity is going to be the same, and as I said, you need to look at operations and infrastructure at the same time. So how is this going to be relevant? Well, question to the gallery. Is it plausible that there should be a train every 5 minutes between New York and Boston, and only a train every 10 between New York and Washington? Yes or no? So, is it plausible that there should be 12 trains an hour, the northern half of the Northeast Corridor, but only 6 on the southern half of the Northeast Corridor? Just based on current ridership, based on what you think ridership might be, based on city sizes. Now, I don't think it's a hard question. No, I don't mean USA plan. Exactly, Nagok. Southern half has higher ridership. This is not because of some kind of thing where you don't measure the demand for a bridge across the river by counting swimmers. This is, I mean, yes, the service levels here are better than here, but also DC is bigger than Boston, and Philadelphia exists. On the other side, there's what, New Haven and Providence. I mean, I lived in Providence. I have visited New Haven more than any other city I haven't lived in, save Boston. Nice cities, also small. So there's always going to be much more ridership here than here. Now, I can see a world in which Boston grows. Why might Boston grow? Biotech is a big thing right now with a lot of innovations that are started by the corona vaccine, by the corona vaccines. There's this understanding that I think that a lot of the future of tech is not software tech or even AI, but biotech. And Boston happens to be a very big center of biotech. But that's not give Boston. But that's not going to turn Boston into a mega city. It's going to turn Boston into a somewhat larger and richer city. And even that requires it to build more housing than it's currently building. So, and more importantly, DC is the capital of the United States. So essentially, anything that strengthens the American economy also strengthens DC. So I don't see a world in which there's more ridership on the northern half of the North rather than on the southern. If anything, I can see a world in which the ridership to the south strengthens more at the expense of, or not the expense, but more relative to that of the north, because one of the things we should ask ourselves about future-proofing is, what about other lines? Not building just this, but other connections. Past the corridor. Well, past Boston, what is there? There's Portland. I think it's a metro area of 700,000 people. Maybe there's a branch up from New Haven to Hartford and Springfield, and yeah, that's conurbation. I think of maybe 2 million people, but it's 2 million people. And then you look at what happens north on the southern half. Well, there's Keystone that already exists. It's actually already electrified with through service. So, okay, this is a little too much. Okay, this is better. The zoom. Yeah, there's already through service with the pinch point that I mentioned. Happens at Leipzig and Frankfurt. Also happens at 30th Street because the way it's set up is trains south go to DC, trains north go to either Harrisburg or New York. So New York to Harrisburg is a pinch, is a direction change, and that is like 700,000 people in this metro area, and maybe if this is a very strong line, there's also demand to punch tunnels through the mountain. So instead of having this kind of very squiggly line that's very slow, you have a straight line that goes like this, and then there's Pittsburgh. Likewise, south of DC, you have the entire south. You have Richmond, you have Hampton Roads, you have Piedmont, you have Atlanta. All of these are going to generate more ridership on the southern half. Also on the northern half. I mean, it does generate ridership on cities, on city pairs like Boston to Pittsburgh. That's not nothing, or Boston to Virginia. But just because of distances, it's going to largely generate ridership on city pairs like New York to Pittsburgh, New York to the entire South. And that is going to mostly overload New York to Philly, New York to DC. And this is where Connor just said, I genuinely don't believe there's a practical limit of demand south. Yeah, this is correct. Huh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so Boston is an important tech center. Um, Boston used to be the biggest American tech city, and then Silicon Valley overtook it, and then it was number two. I think at this point it's no longer even number two. I think Seattle's supposed to be better. I think, and then of course New York. It's like where everyone. I don't think tech firms are founded in New York, but they all go to New York. Biotech is much more northeastern. Pfizer is headquartered in New York. Moderna is in Cambridge. And so yeah, you can make an argument that Boston relatively strengthens, but not to the extent that you could plausibly run a train every 5 minutes New York to Boston but only every 10 New York to Philly or DC. So my point is that we kind of know, at least informally, what the order, maybe not the exact proportions, they're subject to discussion, subject to estimation, they're subject to scenario-based planning about what we think will happen with, again, other extensions, with the state of the economies of the cities affected. But I think everyone understands that New York to Philly is the busiest section, then Philly to DC, then finally New York to Boston. So we need to think what kind of frequency could run. And again, this is based on operations. Essentially, we're maybe not thinking in terms of things like scheduling, but we are thinking in terms of the required capacity for these cities. And so you should and so also very likely the trains are going to run through the entire way, Boston to DC. Are there going to be more trains New York to DC than New York to Boston? Yeah. So presumably the trains will also need a good space to turn around New York. Something that I used to crayon a lot was New York to Jamaica. That the surplus trains that are not required to go to New England should instead divert to the LIRR main line. I think they're actually planned to do that. So the LIRR is it's mostly for service to JFK at Jamaica, but then you might as well run through and hit some suburbs. At this point, I don't think it's a great proposal, mostly because of how it poorly interacts with LIRR timetabling. But so okay, if you don't have a space, if you don't have space for trains to not run through, maybe you want space for trains to branch. So that would be, let's say, New Haven, then Hartford, and Springfield. So that's a scenario. Okay, you're asking me what's the lowest hanging fruit. The problem is that the entire Northeast Corridor is low hanging fruit. I mean, it basically, like, the problem is that there's so much surplus extraction, and the surplus extraction is basically the same everywhere. So, you can't say, okay, the NIMBYs here are too difficult, let's go somewhere else. You can say that, but it's not actually going to help you very much. And so, you see how this is squiggly, you want to bypass this and make this high-speed rail. You want to electrify Boston to Providence, that is to say it's already electrified, but finish a few things and run the regional trains faster, which is being done, it's just being done in a not very good fashion. You want to rewrite the timetables so that they're more coordinated and are all in the same clock face schedule, which also lets you know where the capacity problems are and invest in them specifically. You want to grade separate the worst junctions. The single worst is Shell. This is a flat junction. If you grade separate, this is also where, by the way, where you should absolutely not think in terms of speed-based alts. This needs to be grade separate I think in every scenario for reliability. And if you're doing that, instead of doing this annoying S-curve, just shave a few buildings and make it straighter, or at least, maybe not straight, but straighter. This should not, currently there's I think a 30 miles an hour speed limit there. You do a little bit of work here, and yeah, you need to lose some buildings, but not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's not like demolishing an entire neighborhood to build a fairway, it's demolishing a few buildings. Railways are very space efficient this way. When you do that, you can run at basically full speed. Not 300 kilometers an hour, but 200. So you do little fixes like this. You rebuild the the Penn Station switches and you build the switches at all the major stations based on modern. And by modern I mean 1920s as opposed to American 1890s geometry that is essentially a freebie on speed. It is very cheap to do these rebuilds. You want to waive the 10 miles an hour speed limit in terminal throats and replace that with actually building signals into the terminals. There are a lot of things. Oh, what do you mean went? I'm still in New York. Can you not see the... What? Can you not see the clock? Like, I'm literally at my own right now. Clock face scheduling is, actually less vulnerable because the issue with this is that delays always happen at the same spot with clock face timetabling. So you know where to invest to prevent delays, is the difference. With non-clock face timetables, it's the same thing. When you mix different classes of trains, they will go off schedule. This is a thing that always happens. Oh, the journey. Yeah, no, the flight was. It's good. I had the entire row of seats to myself at least, because it's February. Would a tunnel work around Rochelle if you want to spend more money than you need to? Yeah, of course. No, you don't actually need to change third rail to overheads. Everything on Amtrak is overhead. And the third rail Third rail is DC, and you need to build the train the right way. But essentially every AC train, every alternating current train is also an alternating current train that works at every higher frequency, and also works at DC. DC involves the least amount of infrastructure on board the train because it doesn't need transformers, the most trackside for transformers, and the reason you don't use it for high-speed trains or for modern regional rail anyway, to reduce train mass is that it limits the voltage. You can't do high voltage DC. I mean, maybe you can for transmission, but maybe it's possible to invent a train that does high voltage DC, but that train does not currently exist, and therefore, to get enough juice, you need to go AC. Um, um, yeah, so there is a little bit of free speed, but only a little bit. It's mostly, so you can increase the cant efficiency. Um, it's not exactly about being afraid of lateral g-forces, is that the turnouts, for example, in the United States are so antiquated that the nominal g-force, assuming a perfect circle, is much lower than the actual force that is felt. When you go on like you have the exact same curve radius in the United States, the speed limit might be 40 kilometers an hour, like 25 miles an hour, and in the rest of the world, it's going to be about 1.5 times as much, 60. And the 60 kilometer an hour turnout, again, same curve radius in Germany, is going to throw you sideways less than the 40 kilometer an hour in the United States, just because of that geometry. So it's not free speed; it's very cheap speed. There is free speed, but that's mostly New York to New Haven, where essentially it's just being slowed because of bad timetabling practices. Unauthorized people on the metro tracks. Is it a concern for high-speed rail? No. There are intrusion detection systems. It's not really a problem. It's not. I mean, you would expect maybe in France there's a lot of this subculture of just wrecking shit for the sake of wrecking shit. It's still not done. Oh yeah, I mean yeah, but that's not that big a deal. I mean, third rail is not that bespoke. Um, but anyway, so you want to do this kind of so yeah, you always look for low hanging fruits, and some of them just don't are not really relevant to capacity planning. Like again, fix your goddamn turnouts, and stop running kind of not quite dark, but stop running this semi-dark thing into terminals where the American signaling systems break down in major stations, so they instead run on at restricted speed, which is 10 miles an hour, rather than running with consistent signal blocks, which would need to be very short because this is still a station, and the blocks need to be short at low speed and high capacity, but that's doable. Like you could actually do short blocks if you need to. They do it on the Munich S-Bahn. So, the so again, all of this, the low hanging fruit like this are not really about capacity, but there are things that are about capacity. So, what does concern capacity? So, let's start outside New York and move our way into New York. So Boston to Providence. If you run it, so I think so. First of all, I'm going to start the capacity at 4 trains an hour, Boston to DC. And then I'm going to switch it up to 4 trains per hour, Boston to New York, and 6 trains per hour, New York to DC. No, 6 is not divisible by 4. So essentially, what this means is that it's going to be a train every 10 minutes here, and then through like maybe some trains stopping at New London and some not, and then I guess maybe 2 trains an hour would divert to Hartford and Springfield, and then through the London stop on maybe local trains, they are going to enter Providence evenly spaced every 15 minutes. And again, this is an example of me telling you something about operations informing infrastructure construction. So a train every 15 minutes between Boston and Providence can be run on the two-track line with either one or two overtakes. Where would the overtakes be? If you're doing one overtake, there's only one place for it. It needs to be at the exact middle of the line because you're stretched to the limit. Boston to Providence on a commuter train. No, not the present day commuter trails, which are very slow. They're diesel. They do it in an hour 10, give or take. But on an EMU, it would be about 47 minutes. Boston to Providence with some additional infill stops. Pawtucket has just opened, but we're talking about having these trains also serve Reedville and Forest Hills, both of which exist but not for Boston to Providence trains. And now intercities would do this trip if they go non-stop Boston to Providence in about 21 minutes, if they stop in Back Bay about 23 minutes. There's also the possibility of stopping at Route 128, but I don't think it is valuable for intercities to stop at Route 128. It does make things a little harder because the speed difference is greater, but in some way it makes things easier, and I will explain in a sec when I talk about the other overtake alternative. So 47 versus about 21 or 23. Probably 23 because 47 is padded and 21 is not. So it's 41 versus 23. Give or take, it's 24 minutes of difference. You can kind of do it with one overtake. You still need to steal a minute in effect because you switch between the point of an overtake is you hold the slow train, so that instead of the fast train being just behind the slow train, is just ahead of the slow train, and it's about 2 minutes of difference. So an overtake gives you about 11 minutes of spare time because 15 minus 2 minus 2 is 11. And so you need to stretch it a little bit, and this is not actually great. So you would need to essentially, I won't say find additional slow lanes, but it's trivial to find additional slow lanes. It means just not running the trains faster. It means something like 25 minutes Boston to Providence and not 27 with a single overtake in Sharon. This is an option that I don't think is very good. Why is it not very good? I'm already pointing out to you various shortcomings that essentially it's kind of an edge case. It does slow down the intercities a little bit. It's fragile. So normally you want to minimize the number of overtakes, but maybe you want to do 2 overtakes. Why? Remember I mentioned before that there's an overtake at Attleboro. Again, 4 tracks here. You can see it on Google Earth. Well, why not use the infrastructure that you already have? You have an overtake here. Use it. Now, this is not in the middle of the line. It's maybe 3/4 of the way from Boston to Providence, so maybe you can do another overtake 1/4 of the way. Maybe around Route 128. So what you do then is you build another overtake here, and you maybe use the fact that you're already building it and not using something, you might as well, instead of building 1 kilometer or 4-track, build 5. The prep cost is going to be the same. The physical construction cost is going to be, well, 5 times higher, but the physical construction cost of 2-track kilometers is basically 0. It's like $10 million. It's like about $5-ish million per track kilometer. The hard costs and the design costs are not actually going to be proportional, not to this scale. So you do between probably Reedville and Route 128. And then it's actually available for the intercities not to stop at Route 128. Now, if they stop at Route 128, then it's a transfer station, which is good. But it also means that you need to slow down the regional further. Remember, the point of an overtake is to rearrange things so that the slow train, so that entering the overtake, the slow train is 2 minutes ahead of the fast train. Departing the overtake section, the slow train is 2 minutes behind the fast train. You want on the overtake to maximize the speed difference as a result, because if you don't, you're just making the slow train sit there. So that's why I think it's valuable for intercities not to stop at Route 128. Now you can ask the question, wait, but if it's a transfer, then it's valuable for passengers, right? Yes, there's absolutely is, but think about it. I mean, it's not that useful to let people transfer Boston bound slow to fast, because it just means slightly faster train service from these suburbs to Boston, and to a large extent you're regaining some of that travel time by just running the regional faster if it doesn't need to stay as long for the intercity. So it's a couple minutes of time savings. Again, it's not nothing. You don't fully gain it back, but it's a couple minutes. Not that important. Now, going out, yeah, it absolutely does help you with people from, let's say, Reedville or Hyde Park can take the local and then transfer to an express at Route 128. But let's face it, that's not a big market. Yeah, some people live here, but not that many. So yeah, it just gives these people a faster trip to New York than if they go wrong way to Back Bay or South Station and then go down or go all the way to Providence. I mean, that's not that useful. And that's only in one direction. This is say people living here going to New York. In the opposite direction, it's almost useless. People going from New York to these areas. How many people are traveling from New York to Hyde Park? If I'm in New York and I am... Ooh, yes, the cart. Give me one moment. The answer is yes, give me one moment. If I'm living in New York, I'm not, but let's say I'm in New York right now, okay? And maybe I'm going to visit Boston this trip. Yeah, maybe if I'm visiting friends, then they might live in Hyde Park. They don't. They tend to live in Cambridge. But if I'm visiting Boston, not for the purpose of visiting friends, which is usually how one visits another city, I'm visiting for something that's specific to Boston that is usually centered around city center. Think about it. Why do you think that in New York, I mean, the hotels in New York are not isotropic around the city. The hotels cluster around Manhattan. The hotels that are not in Manhattan aim to be as close as possible to Manhattan. There's a hotel cluster in Long Island City. This is where I've been staying in my New York trips, essentially since I visited the city without crashing with friends. There's likewise a cluster of hotels in like the inner part of Brooklyn. There's a cluster in Jersey, close enough to the city that you can take a bus or path. And likewise in Boston, you can check where the hotels are. They are not in Hyde Park or Reedville. They're maybe downtown Boston, Back Bay, Cambridge. Why? Again, think why you're visiting Boston. You're not visiting Boston to go to CVS, right? You can go to CVS anywhere in America. And if you know my blog comments, you know that this is also how Adirondacker keeps mocking the idea of thrill running. He's not right, but it's also not right, if that makes sense. If you're visiting Boston for Boston-specific things. These tend to cluster in the center. Not maybe just downtown Boston, but maybe you're visiting something at MIT or Harvard. Yeah, MIT and Harvard are here. They're not in Hyde Park. Maybe you're like baseball. You want to see... What's the baseball team in Boston? The Red Sox? Yeah. Fenway Park is here. Fenway Park is not in Hyde Park. And again, you can look at all these destinations. So, essentially, I'm arguing against the transfer. I'm saying the transfer is not that... It has value, but very little. And it's probably more valuable to just have the trains go faster. By a couple of minutes into Boston. So, you do these two overtakes. I have blog posts about this. They're very old. There's essentially it's compatible with like the entire Transit Matters stack for regional rail, this one. And now I was asked about the Stoughton line. The Stoughton line is currently a branch. Eventually will go all the way down to Fall River here in New Bedford, but that doesn't actually impact the planning in any way. This should be electrified. In fact, the only way this line gets extended to Fall River and New Bedford legally is with electric wire, because and this is why it's the current plans for South Coast Rail try to do a very awkward loop-de-loop to Middleborough. The reason is that there are two environmentally sensitive wetlands here. Not that difficult to actually build through them. There's an Army Corps of Engineers study, but it is required that the trains for them be electric to avoid diesel pollution. So essentially, it's a freebie. You don't need to ever deal with to ever think about diesels here. And meanwhile, they should also electrify Canton Junction to Stoughton. And the way this works here is that with the two overtake plan, you can actually pretty easily slot Stoughton trains into South Station without overtakes. They enter the Northeast Corridor just behind, like going inbound just behind the intercities, and then they will get to South Station with a few minutes to spare before the intercity behind them catches up. It's a short section. It's not a very high speed section, so this is what you do with the train every 15 minutes. And you're asking about the Fairmount line. The Fairmount line, just is not relevant. I guess the Franklin line goes to Fairmount and doesn't touch the Northeast Corridor. This is a train every 15 minutes. Now, what happens if you need more? By the way, this is also in a low investment scenario because there might be a north-south rail link in Boston someday. It is this alignment. The north-south rail link means you don't need to deal with terminal slowdowns, but it also means that you need to deal with what's on the other side. Essentially, you should start by working with the timetable I just gave you, with how the track sharing works, and then figure out the pairings above. And just as a reminder for people who are not regular readers, north-south rail link should not involve intercity trains. Intercity trains, there is some value in running intercity trains through, but there's even more value in not running them through for such reasons as if you run intercities, I guess you're running them to Portland. That's the main destination past Boston. Portland is small. Frequency is important. So it's much more important to run trains Boston to Portland hourly or half hourly than to run big trains. Boston to New York is going to need big trains, 16-car trains. You're not going to need 16-car trains Boston to Portland unless you're not running very frequently. So unless you're also willing to break the train somewhere, which is going to take time, and the north-south railing tunnel is exactly the wrong place to break trains because it's going to be a very high throughput, very busy urban rail link. Then you shouldn't do it. Keep the intercities at South Station. Boston and Portland should just be regional trains that go farther than Haverhill, and passengers can transfer at South Station. That's fine. And so, but if that is built, then you do need to think how, because it does constrain the exact timings of the Providence Line trains, and this also constrains the exact timings of the trains on the north side that connect to Providence. I don't know which ones. So this is something that you need to think about. I'm not going to say what, because I haven't figured this out, but you do need to think about it. But anyway, so every 15 minutes is how you do Boston to Providence. But again, we need to think about higher capacity for future proofing. If it's every 10 minutes, you absolutely cannot do what I just said, right? Because, let's say 23 minutes, 47 minutes, you don't have 11 minutes, right? Because 15 minus 2 minus 2 is 11, you don't have 11, you only have 6. So you can still do short 2-track narrows, but very short. You would need multiple overtakes to be able to get this. You need 3, because 47 minus 23 is 24. So it's essentially 4 sections between overtakes, so 3 overtakes. In theory, you can do it with overtakes and where I said, like Reedville to Route 128, then Sharon, then Attleboro, but this is only in theory, and in practice, it's too fragile. So in practice, you would need to have extensive 4-tracking. I'm guessing that you would do an overtake around Route 128 to Reedville. You might also want to 4-track deeper into Boston, essentially until the right-of-way here is 3 tracks, but you might want to make that into slightly widen into 4. There is space. You can kind of see that next to the tracks there is space for a 4th track. I think you only really lose the space for the 4th track at Forest Hills, which is annoying, but I think you can deal with that. with just 3 tracks here. So like 4 tracks from somewhere in Boston, maybe around Hyde Park, to past Route 128. Canton is left 2 tracks because it's a viaduct. It's a viaduct from the 1830s, which was actually built very well for the era. It's a very wide curve. It's a nice masonry structure with blind arches. You might be able to tell from the side. The arches are not like, yeah, there are some openings in the arches, but most of these are just architectural. Like these are blind arches. This essentially is the last bit you will ever for track. So you start doing this, and then you probably are gonna 4 track from Sharon to past Attleboro, so that you will do an overtake where an intercity overtakes 2 regionals on its way. Oh, Canton Junction might need grade separation. Yes, you're right. I've only figured this out for 15 minutes, and you can do it without grade separation. The trick is that because you have Canton Center going inbound, and you have the station here to some extent, and I emphasize to some extent, you can to some extent use this to reorder trains as kind of an ersatz pocket track for inbound trains. Outbound is harder. Outbound is less likely to be running out of schedule because the trains are all going to originate in Boston South Station. Again, we're assuming no NSRL. With NSRL, it's likely that you might need to grade separate this anyway. I guess so. With the flat junction, the conflict is between inbound intercities and outbound regionals. And the outbound and the regionals, again, if you don't have NSRL, the regionals can be relied upon to be on schedule departing Boston. That's pretty close to Boston. The intercities generally should just not go off schedule. Generally, high-speed trains on schedule. I mean, it's less true when you have a lot of track sharing, to be fair, but I guess it depends on the exact track sharing situation, because you're going to have a very long section without track sharing up to Providence, from Stamford to Providence, I guess. So that might so even that might be viable, but again, it's very delicate, and likely at 10-minute frequencies you need to grade separate. Certainly in anything more than that, I would not be comfortable not grade separating. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, beyond that, it's what, 8 trains per hour to Boston, 12 south of New York, maybe. Then you might just need to quad track everything except the viaduct. Of course, you also need to think about regional rail frequencies. Probably a train every 10 minutes. Intercity also means a train every 10 minutes regional. Or maybe a train every 20 minutes, because then you might sell standing tickets Providence to Boston, and then essentially kill the regional rail market between Rhode Island and Boston, because people are just going to take intercities. That's also a thing to think about. So anyway, this is the Boston capacity plan. Again, there are several levels of what you do, and you can kind of think of the alt that's just quad tracking 1 extra overtake, which can be either Sharon, which I think is inferior, or Route 128 to Radial, which I think is superior. More sections where you do both of them, and probably also complete Sharon to Attleboro with possibly going past both to give the intercities more space to fully overtake. Remember, intercity overtakes 2 trains. This is for turning for 10 minutes. Maybe you need to extend a little bit past Reedville, although I'm not sure you do, and want to avoid complex construction within the built-up area of Boston, of course. Grade separating here is at a higher investment level. Again, it's a kind of hierarchy of what is built before what. This is Boston to Providence. If you have commuter trains from Providence to Point South, essentially they just run between intercities, and they have the lowest priority in your planning. So essentially, plan the intercities as if there is no commuter rail south of Providence. There is, but it gets basically 0 ridership. if you really want, you might think, and I emphasize might think, of like stopping some of the intercities in Kingston. Probably not, but maybe. Uh, and then and then figure out how to what kind of replacement service. Essentially, the issue is basically nobody rides these trains. The trains from Providence down to South County were expected to get a lot of ridership. They built 1,200 parking spots. I think their pre-corona ridership was maybe 400 instead of 1,200. So essentially, if you ever want to make these better, just you count the cost of additional infrastructure, which is there, but it's not horrific. It's just the regional rail cost. So no worry about capacity up until New Haven. Now, as I said, I'm going to go from out of New York to into New York, so we're going to stop this in New Haven. Actually, we're not going to stop it in New Haven because this line is 4-track. Again, there might be 3-track narrows, but they're being plugged as we speak, I believe. Capacity is not really going to be an issue past Stanford. All of these bypasses are a matter of speed, not capacity. You can absolutely keep running the trains at much lower speed on the express tracks here, through Darien and Norwalk, and then the regionals just take the local tracks and make all the stops. Presently, there are some faster regional trains which don't make every stop between Stanford and New Haven, but that would change under any kind of... First of all, this is just bad planning because it is additional stopping patterns that you need to slot into the timetable, but more importantly, if you have good intercity rail service, the intercity rail service is how people get between New York and New Haven, and so for service to, let's say, Bridgeport or all the other intermediate points, you don't need these express trains as much. And so you just have the regionals make every stop every, I don't know, half an hour or whatever between Stanford and New Haven. And they just don't touch the intercities, they're on different tracks, even if none of these bypasses is built. So capacity is not really an issue between Providence, as I mentioned, and Stanford. We're going to skip Stanford to New York right now because we're going to do New York last. And we're going to flip to the other side. I talked about a train every 10 minutes between Washington and Baltimore a few videos ago, and I'm not going to repeat what I said too much. It is required to do some additional quad-tracking for that. Less if you're running every 15 minutes, but every 15 minutes, New York to DC. I mean, you should look at this, but it's probably a bit sketch to assume that. That's essentially... Like, I don't think that works at normal high-speed rail fare. Fare points, which would be, on average, I believe, $60 New York to Washington nowadays. So lower in second class, I guess coach class, higher in first class, or business class, or whatever you want to call it. This is, like, it's viable to do this for, let's say, $49. In today's money, not in the 2010s. 49 before the inflation would have been the average. So think in those terms, yeah, you're going to get more ridership because right now Amtrak, right now it's a very special fare that gets you something this low. Normally you're paying $100 more if you ride a cell. So again, think about impacts of lower fares due to lower operating costs and much higher speed and reliability on ridership. So I think that you need to start by already planning for 10 minutes, New York to DC. Every 15 minutes, again, maybe, but probably you want to design it all at once. And so, again, you need some 4-tracking, not full 4-tracking Baltimore to Washington. I think there's a plan to do full 4-tracking if it's already committed and do it, but if not, then maybe see if you can do only parts of it, if it's viable. And it would be probably, I think, 2 overtakes, I want to say, between Baltimore and Washington every 10 minutes. If you're wondering why it's 2, whereas I said you need 3 overtakes, if it's an overtake-based system for Boston to Providence every 10 minutes, these trains make fewer stops. There are fewer intermediate stops there. is the issue. So, um, now, for more frequency than this, let's say let's say 8 trains an hour, I imagine that you will just need to fully for track. Or at least fully for track, let's say, between, b what's this called? Between New Carrollton, that was the name that I was missing, between New Carrollton and maybe the airport, or maybe even City Line. And then for 12, you would need to probably even go into West Baltimore and make that 4 tracks, which is not, it's not that fun, but I mean, look, this is the current infrastructure at West Baltimore. Yeah, it's not great for this, but this is a 4-track station. I don't actually know. I mean, I guess I'm seeing trains here, so I guess it's already being used as a 4-track system. So it's not like you're starting from nothing. Let me actually check this bridge, just out of curiosity. It looks like yeah, it's a 4-track bridge. Yeah, so like the hard parts, I guess, are already 4-track in a sense. So again, you're not starting from 0. You can actually do this. If it's 8 or more trains an hour. If it's 6, again, don't. Here there's like, I guess, a smattering of commuter trains which are mucking everything, but these should basically be thought of as the same as south of Providence. They always step aside for intercities. This is not Baltimore to Washington or Boston to Providence. Something much weaker. You might want to think a little bit about mixing slow trains on the slow intercity trains. And by slow, maybe I should not call them slow. I call them Kodama, like fast trains that make more stops. Things like Aberdeen, if you really want. And so the capacity. So here it's not that much of a capacity plan. Wilmington to Philly is not capacity constrained either, because essentially not everything, most things are 4-track, and by the time you drop down to 3, I think you're maybe already in Delaware, and when you do that, I mean, yeah, you might want to contract something, but it's not going to be substantial. The big question is, do you include a bypass around Wilmington or not? Which is something that's probably more viable at higher frequency, right? Because if you're only running a train every 10 minutes, New York to DC, then I guess every 20 minutes stopping Wilmington every 20 minutes, maybe it's not as viable. But if it's, let's say, 8 or 9 trains per hour, then the bypass is going to be used by more trains, because presumably most trains will not stop in Wilmington. Likewise, if it's 12 trains an hour, then yeah, the bypass makes more sense. So essentially, this is a higher level of investment. The Wilmington bypass. Yeah, West Baltimore is platform length, sure, but I mean, Intercity is never going to stop there, so that's not going to matter. Have I written anything about Vegas? No. I wrote a little bit about it long before it was called Brightline. The issue there is that it's a viable city pair. The problem is that it's also extremely peaky. So you should apply certain malus to it, just because so much of the ridership is going to be concentrated at a few peak times. Now, of course, peakiness is where trains shine compared with cars. However, peakiness is still bad for your operating costs. So put me down as a solid maybe on this. If I consider platform length, yeah, one of the points is that all of the intercities should be 16-car trains. Nearly all of the stations that have any business being intercity stations either already have 16 cars, are already long enough for 16 cars. For example, New York and Washington, or can be so lengthened relatively painlessly. New Haven is not. Even New Haven is viable for that. And I know that between New York and DC, everything is at least 12 cars. So yeah, you might have stations that are, I think, 12 or 14, but usually lengthening them is not that painful. Wilmington, so for example, I think Wilmington is 10 lengthenable to 12 painlessly. Let me actually check this. It's a good thing that you're asking me this. So Wilmington, start here. This is 317. Yeah, this is a 13 car station. Um, you may be able to go a little bit farther here. And then a little bit farther here. You see there's a gap between the tracks. It is a little bit sketch, but it is something that you can actually swing as like as a 16 car station. Worst case scenario, 14 cars. The front and end cars don't stop, don't platform, and then you just do selective door opening. Ideally, you want to avoid selective door opening, but it's one of the less busy stations, and it's just telling people to walk one car in on trains that have wider vestibules than are currently used for American commuter trains. So it's easier to move between cars. I guess with Amtrak, it's not that hard to move between cars. But look at Shinkansen, for example, or ICEs or TGVs, then it shouldn't be that big of a deal. You might even, because of this is not a busy station, still be able to do it in a 60-second dwell time. Oh, single track processing? I don't know. The answer is honestly I don't know. The thing is, if you have this little expected ridership, this calls the entire line into question. And think about it. Nobody actually builds high-speed trains this way. They always think why, and the answer is usually want more. You usually want more capacity from day one. And is it viable? Maybe, but it's worthwhile asking questions. Also, bear in mind that a lot of the design costs are the same regardless of whether it's one or two tracks. So you're not actually saving half the money building one track rather than two. You're saving a lot less than half the money. So anyway, this is why, as I said, solid maybe. But so anyway, the point is that with Wilmington, yeah. So the bypass is something you would do at higher TPH count. So this is again, it's one of those things like grade separating Canton Junction. Building a bypass, it's not just the existing Attleboro bypass, but something extending from south of Attleboro all the way up to Sharon. One of those things that you want to do at higher frequency, you want to think how you're gonna future-proof for that. So this means maybe making sure for when you quad track something here that there is room for, or maybe if there's a bridge, maybe make sure there's room to continue the bridge onto the bypass. Making sure that you know where the bypass is going to go, because you have a little bit of 2D geometry here, not 1D, because do you go here, do you go here, do you leverage the existing bypass and then just grade separate it, whatever. It's a bunch of options I'm not really getting into because I'm usually focused on low capacity planning, essentially because 12 trains per hour profits pay for everything, and I'm trying to think of how to do it for 4 or 6. And bear in mind that even then, I wanted to say fuck it, every train serves Wellington. At very high frequency, I don't think it's the right technical decision, but it's also not. You're not. I mean, yeah, you're leaving value on the table. You're not leaving that much value on the table. Wilmington, again, is a small city, but it's not a village. And then it's 4 tracks. And then maybe at lower investment levels, at lower capacity, you might have some express commuter trains from Trenton to Philly. But again, at some point, if you're selling standing tickets, why would you do this? I mean, it's cheaper to serve Trenton to Philly passengers on a fast train than on a slow train, because a fast train already exists. You're not dealing with any capacity problems, certainly not to Philly, because the point where the capacity constraint is New York, not Philly. And of course with New York, yeah, that's a capacity problem, but the trains are longer, so it's easier to provide the capacity with intercities than with regionals, for the Trenton to New York issue. So you're not really constrained on capacity here. And so maybe at lower investment levels, again, maybe a train every 10 minutes, possibly even a train every 15, not possibly, especially for a train every 15, you might want to also run, you also want to intrude on the right of way with some express commuter trains, but this is not a good line for express commuter trains, is the problem with it. I mean, yeah, it makes a bunch of stops. I'll actually check on my I don't remember. What do you mean? What do you mean? Wilmington is not serviced for demand. Do you mean like it's political because of Biden? Like, Biden is not going to be the president forever. Um, Biden is so old that there are people thinking about having a competitive 2024 primary. Even though he's a perfectly popular, like, normie liberal Democrat. Um, yeah. So anyway, from with Philly, let's look. Trenton is like what? Is Levittown? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, it's 11 stops in 50 kilometers. Yeah, I mean it's not. I mean, it's not that wide, but still. I mean, like, what exactly are you saving by running a mix of express and local trains on SEPTA? So probably you shouldn't be thinking about it too much and just consigning Trenton to Baltimore to be kind of like Stanford to Providence, a section where you are probably not thinking very much about capacity, with the exception again of the not Baltimore, the Wilmington bypass. And then the question is always going down to the hardest part, which is New York, which I keep accepting it in my video, accepting EXCEPT, not accept ACCEPT. So I keep making an exception out of New York just because it's the hardest thing to timetable. Again, Stanford to New Haven might actually be not that hard. It's just it's the stuff Stanford to New York, New York to Trenton that's annoying. So let's actually dive into it a little bit. We're not doing timetabling. We're making assumptions on timetabling that might turn out to be false, but are likely not to. So let's see. Shell interlocking is not really a question of. Remember, I said you can shave a few buildings. Here's how you shave buildings. The nice thing is, I don't think any of them is a big apartment building. This is. I'm pretty sure this is like industrial land use around here. I guess this might need to go, and this is the. I want to call it a nouveau tenement, but I think of nouveau tenements as things in the city, not in New Rochelle. But it looks kind of like it's built along the same lines as the city's nouveau tenements. This looks maybe townhouses. This is not. This does not look residential. I can't tell what this is. This does not look residential to me either. So you do this a little bit of shave. You do this, first of all, because the current speed is 30 miles an hour. I think you could do a 45 on this geometry, but that's still very low. This is a flat junction. It doesn't matter what capacity you're planning on for high-speed trains, because for intercity trains, because the New Haven line presently runs, I believe, 20 or 22 not presently. Presently, that is to say, as of the eve of Corona, I think it's something like 20 or 21 trains per hour on this section. So it doesn't matter how many intercities are on, whether you're running 4 or 6 or 8. The conflict is always based on the more frequent of the service patterns. You should basically think of the commuter trains when everything is done with Penn Station Access as 12 local, 12 express. So essentially, the question of 4 or 6 trains per hour, it matters here, but not that much. 8 matters maybe a little bit more. I guess 8 would be. The issue with 8 is that 8 does not divide 12, so how 8 fits into 12 is a little bit weird. I guess it would be like 12 and 12, but then you don't have a lot of space. And that does get hairier. So I guess 6 and 12 it's different from 8 and 12 is the point. Um, I'm pretty sure you need this bypass even for 4, definitely for 6. Um, and then that should be, I want to say it should be the end of this, because remember, I'm talking not about bypasses of intercities and local commuter lanes that make all of these little stops. I mean, I shouldn't say little there. But most of these would be, no, I don't even mean Stamford, I mean Greenwich and a few others would be by a margin the busiest commuter rail station in the Boston suburbs. The busiest in the Boston suburbs, I want to say, is Salem, which is 2.3k. I think Greenwich is about that. New Rochelle is, I think New Rochelle and Larchmont are both about 4k each. Stanford is, I think, 8k. So maybe I shouldn't call them little. But anyway, so the point is about, remember, this is a 4-track line. This, almost all the way to New Haven, is a 4-track line. Oh, yeah, oh, you mean New Rochelle. Yeah, the area is changing fast, thousands of apartments, man. Awesome. Just safeguard just safeguard any bypass route. It's not that hard to safeguard. You just say you can't build here because this is going to be because this is for future federal infrastructure, and that's all there is to it. Build the apartment blocks not here, but here, here, here. Lots of space for them. Just safeguard the route. It's not done in American planning, but that's because American planning, as a reminder, is on a spectrum between bad and unsalvageable. So anyway, the point is not about, so because it's a 4-track line, you don't look at how intercities can bypass stopping trains. It's how they bypass non-stopping trains. It's how you're going to have a train that goes from New Rochelle making no stops except as enforced by the track sharing arrangement up to Stamford potentially, but it runs at 160 kilometers an hour. The intercity will make an attempt at, I think, 230, 250. I could actually check this because I have. I think these are pretty optimistic speed zones. So Harrison is the one that is 100. When you say 170, current rate is only good for 150. I think it's just a matter of how crazy you want to take the cant, the track super elevation. So you have these intercities that do 200-ish, and regionals that do 160. So the speed difference between this and Stanford is not that massive. We can actually check this because we can check the kilometer point to Stanford. We can check this, and we can check this on this line. Where's Stanford? So the bypass here. Let's look at the bypass. The bypass starts at about kilometer point 12.5 and around 19. This is a bridge bypass. This is, again, taking 2 short curves and replacing them with a long wide curve. This is not about capacity. This is something this also is a movable bridge, so generally a bad thing to have around. Stanford is what? Kilometer point 27? Okay, we can play with that. So, okay, I should go. I should maybe try to do this so that, yeah, because my head is bottom left, so I should not have numbers bottom left. Yeah. So, Stanford, yeah, it's something like 200. It's mostly 200 kilometer an hour territory. The sections on the sections heading into and through the bypass might be 250 around here. And other sections are slightly slower, but if it's about 26 kilometers of 200, or 27 kilometers of 200 versus 160, it's a difference of 2 minutes. trivially easy if it is let's say 12 trains per hour, even if it's 12 trains an hour express and 6 intercity. Now the if it's 12 trains an hour express and they're rigidly every 5 minutes, you don't have space because you only have, remember, 5 minutes a minute is 1 minute. And this is 2 minutes. Which would also multiply by the factor for padding, which is 1.7, so 2 point bit. But why would the? But you can steal a minute. You can have the 12 regional, 12 express trains per hour. If you absolutely need to, if you don't want to build this bypass, you can absolutely have them go. Let's say they depart Stanford instead of at 0, 0, and 0, 5 repeat every 10 minutes, at 0, 0, and 0, 3 repeat every 10 minutes. And yeah, it's a bit sketch because then you would have the intercity depart 07 or 08. And then again, you're selling standing tickets on these. So it's not the best, but you can play with that, that's fine. And especially because the main purpose of the intercity, the express regionals, is not to get people Stanford to New York. Remember, Stanford to New York would exist as an intercity. In general, you can look at the current timetables. Like the current timetables, like these express trains don't just do Stanford to New York. They always go well past Stanford. So it matters where they go past Stanford. So you can say, every 10 minutes, let me flip the 0 and 3. Just move it so that the intercity departs Stanford inbound at 0, 0. So the intercity departs Stanford 0, 0. A regional express at 0, 2, and another, instead of at 0, 7, as would be expected with their even spacing, at 0, 5 instead. You can just say that the 0, 2 maybe is a train from New Haven, and the 0, 5 is a train that came from somewhere else, like New Canaan or from Danbury. That's fine. You're not gonna mess with the relative crowding levels too much, I don't think. If anything, you can play with that a little bit. So the intercities. So even if we pretend that the intercities don't sell standing tickets, which is it's an option, right? I mean, you don't sell standing. The TGVs don't sell standing tickets. The Shinkansen do, but at still higher price points than regionals, which I don't think is the right choice for the JRs. But if they want to leave money on the table, they're already very profitable. So let's say for a sec it's just those regionals that depart Stanford. Remember, the intercity inbound departs 0, 0, the regional 02, and 05. So you would expect the 02 to be more crowded than the 05 because if passengers arrive at Stanford randomly, which they would, why wouldn't they? I mean, if the widest gap between trains is 7 minutes, you don't try to make a specific train at Stanford, right? I mean, it's like, it's show up and go. So the 05 is going to be less crowded than the 02 with passengers from Stanford, so you actually want to do the opposite of what I said 3 minutes ago, and you would want to have the 05 be the more crowded branch. So that would be the New Haven trains coming direct from New Haven, or from the main line itinerary of the New Haven line, and then the 02, the train that is likely to be more crowded with Stanford passengers, that should be the train coming from the less crowded branch, in this case New Canaan, or possibly Danbury. You can play with that, and that's fine. In theory, by the way, you could do this on the subway as well, with, let's say, the 2 and 3 trains, where essentially the 3 train is a short train version of the 2 train that just happens to go on a 2-stop branch into Harlem. And the 2, as everyone knows, going southbound toward Midtown in the morning. The 2 is much more crowded than the 3. So it's something that, if the timetabling were sufficiently granular, I don't think it is there, but it's something they could even think of having having the gaps be not exactly the same to match, so that the crowding levels would match. Again, it's not that viable when you're doing the 2 and 3 trains, and each of them should be running every 5 minutes, but when it's something where the combined is every 5 and each service is every 10, it's something that you can do. So the point is that this is not really capacity-based planning past Stanford. The bridges are not. No, this bypass, again, it might be, but it might not be. Remember, we just figured out how the express trains don't need to deal with us. Now, bear in mind, the express trains maybe don't need to deal with it, but then there's a section from New Rochelle to the city, and then you would need to have a lot of foretracking to make sure that everything is okay. Now maybe you might say, oh, the express trains are just going to all go to Grand Central, and then because the point is to give local service to these new local stops. And again, there are options for what to do, but but I wouldn't call the bypass here something that's only in a higher investment alternative, because even though you don't need, I guess you don't need it for capacity in the least constraint case, there are other constraints. Okay, there are going to be the throttling constraints. You could do this without throttling, but it probably imposes more constraints at Penn Station than it solves. So there's going to be, some of these trains are going to end up sharing tracks with Amtrak in New Jersey, or at least in the tunnel between Manhattan and New Jersey. This is not fully four-track. This can have some four-track bypasses, but Hellgate Bridge isn't going to be. So it's something that probably needs to be there even at the lowest levels. And again, don't forget, it's also a bypass of an unusually slow section through Portchester and Greenwich. So it's good almost from day one. Like the reason I'm not saying from day one is that you should probably do the lowest hanging fruit. So fix this junction at Shell. Start building. I'm not saying build. Start building this and electrify these trains. Fix the interlockings that you do first. But essentially anything that, let's call high-speed trains high-speed rail between New York and Boston is this stuff that you do at the same priority level as this high-speed line New Haven to Kingston. Yeah. This absolutely isn't that priority level. Is in the priority bucket. Darien, I can see a world in which Darien is done later. In which Darien and Fairfield and the tunnel under Bridgeport and Stratford is done. All of these three things are done later. I'm not saying it's a lower priority. I'm saying I can see a world in which it's a lower priority. But this is not. I cannot see one in which this is a lower priority. Portchester, Greenwich. So, now you might notice that, as I said, it gets really hairy if it's 12 trains an hour. For high-speed trains. Now, I don't think there are going to be 12 north of New York, but 8, I can see that world. For 6, you can still do this, but for 6, you need to, 6 probably is honestly, 6 probably the early bit, because you're going to do 6 to New Haven, and then, maybe they enter New Haven evenly spaced, and then every third train goes north, every third train stops at New London, every third train doesn't stop at New London, like skips New London. You can also see a world in which, they don't enter evenly spaced, because some of them might stop at New Rochelle, some at Stanford, I'm not sure. And this is, again, it's more scenario-based planning. How are you going to do local and express train sharing? Stopping at Stanford is one way to kind of alleviate any kind of capacity crunch you're going to create by shoving away trains here. And likewise New Rochelle for the transfers. But the broader issue is, at some point, you're running against the limit of Hellgate. I think you can do 6 trains an hour without hitting that snag. It's going to be annoying because it's going to be track sharing with locals, and not expresses, but I guess the locals do their own thing, thankfully. But at some point, you're hitting a snag. What is the snag that you're hitting? Can you do 12 plus 6? Again, yes. 12 plus 8, yes, but that already requires you to think about how to move the trains around, how they're going to fit into the same timetable. And And probably by 8 you might want to start thinking of an entirely new path through New York. This also concerns Gateway. I imagine Gateway is at the same priority level. Let's call Gateway the high-speed rail priority level, and again, the high-speed rail priority level is defined as the priority level of, maybe I shouldn't say New Haven to Kingston, let's call it East Haven to Kingston. The New Haven to Kingston line having essentially 3 sections. New Haven to East Haven, this is short, more expensive. I think actually probably saves the same amount of time relative to cost. Just because it goes around this annoying curve, but still, you can do it or you can not do it. Then up to Old Saybrook, you might notice that the line here is not as gnarly as around here. The current plans only do the 3rd section, which is Old Saybrook. So I think they transition around here. Old Saybrook to Kingston. I don't think there's a good case for only doing Old Saybrook to Kingston. I think you should do. The main reason they're doing anything is partly not just because it saves more time per kilometer, because I don't think it saves more time per minute. Not per minute. Sorry. What is more time per minute? It's like what? Second per second? Like, there's only one value of second per second, it is 1. Sorry, I meant cost per minute. I think the cost per minute here and here is going to be the same. It's just easier to build here. Here it might be the same, but it requires second order information that I don't have. The reason is that they're trying to also bypass the movable bridges on the rivers, which strictly limit capacity because pleasure boats. So all of them are in the Old Saybrook to Kingston section. They're here, and here. And sorry. And so let's call high-speed rail anything in the priority level of East Haven to Kingston. Because I think also New Haven to East Haven, I'm not 100% sure. So stuff like making sure that these are electric on the regional trains, that is much higher priority. Fixing the interlockings, writing clock face timetables for everything, higher priority. Maybe building another bypass is the same priority level as this, because if you electrify the commuter trains and you're on EMUs, and you don't also speed up the intercities here, then you don't need to really bypass, because it's not going to be 47 minutes versus 23, it's going to be 47 versus 35 or something like that, and that can almost be done with no bypassing, or if it is, it's going to be at Alabor or something, which already exists, so no big deal. I would argue that Gateway is the same priority as this. It's hard to say because Gateway is not an intercity rail project. Amtrak keeps selling it as if it is in order to attract broader interest, but it is not. It's a commuter rail capacity project. It's a commuter reliability project. It is not a commuter rail. Sorry, it is only a commuter rail project. It's useful for intercity trains because a stronger commuter rail network strengthens the intercity network and vice versa. But it is not an intercity rail project. But I believe, again, they would probably be the same priority level. And I don't think I can talk about high-speed trains without talking about Gateway to at least some extent, even if I'm saying it's a commuter rail project, in the same way that I don't think it's possible to talk about high-speed rail to Boston without talking about scenario planning for the north-south rail link. For the record, I don't think the north-south rail link is at the priority level. It's a lower priority. You can even, if you want to shrink the search space, I don't know if I need to shrink the search space, but if I do, I'm probably going to do 4 trains per hour, Providence to Boston, and no north-south rail link, or 6 to 8 trains per hour, Providence to Boston, and also with north-south rail link, as opposed to kind of a 2x2 or 2x3. 2x3 because 4, 6, 8. 2x2, yes, and the 2 is yes or no to an SRL. So anyway, Gateway, good priority, very important project, being done very poorly. There's a cost spiral in which the costs never go down, only up, no matter how much they de-scope, but it's fixable. It's fixable with good procurement, fixable with some value engineering. It's doable. And then, and I'm also even including the extension of Gateway that would be to Grand Central. For better through running. So again, that's not based on capacity because it's something that you need to scenario plan with and without, just because it's unclear what can be done first. But it's something that ideally should be done in conjunction. So it's writing timetables with and without, and again, without it just means you're going to sell a lot of standing tickets, Trenton to New York, to create more capacity. For that, I think that it's mostly, it's essentially mostly until it's done. It's not like never do this. Remember, high-speed trains increase the case for commuter rail capacity, even if they substitute for a little bit, as they do because of those standing tickets. And the reason is that if you have high-speed rail here, then it means it's easier to get to where the stations are, right? It means there are going to be more business trips. Of course, also leisure trips, but usually what determines commuter rail is the business trips. More business trips to New York. Why? Because it's going to be easier to get to New York from Washington, Philadelphia, Boston, Wilmington, New Haven, Providence. So, if it's easier to do so, and also, I mean, just it's going to be something like 20-something minutes, New York to Toronto. Just putting it out there on the standing tickets. So, maybe half an hour, I'm not sure. So if it's half an hour New York to Toronto on a standing ticket, it's also going to induce more commuter demand. So first of all, the commuter demand is going to eventually fill the capacity. And second, it's going to make New York stronger as a destination. And over time, it's also going to create more commuter rail demand there, regardless of the speed up New York to Trenton. It's also going to create more commuter rail demand to New York from everywhere, even the Long Island Railroad, for example, which doesn't really touch the high-speed rail system. So, even though you can use high-speed trains, like you can use these 16-car intercities to, in the short run, steal some capacity from regional trains, it is not viable long run, and Gateway needs to be built. It just should not be built as a $30 billion project, because come on. And so, the capacity issue is not Gateway, because again, Gateway is not about 4 or 6 or 8. I guess south of New York, it's not going to be 4, 6 or 8 or 12, 6 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 high-speed trains per hour. I mean, you absolutely need it for more than 6, I think, but even at 6, you should build Gateway. So. Actually, maybe at 8 you don't. You can still just do more and more standing tickets. I'm not sure, but 12, forget about it. So the point is that. But what do you do at 12? So I don't think you only do Gateway at 12. You do Gateway at 6 or 8, but at 12, you might actually want to think about a dedicated path for just high-speed trains. Is that true? Because and this is an argument that I've had with some people that the demand, even with some standing tickets, is still going to be substantial. Probably, what kind of everyone assumes is going to happen is, and I'm rounding a little bit, 6 trains per hour, so train every 10 minutes on each of the following service patterns into Penn Station. High-speed train, like intercity trains, express commuter trains on the Northeast Corridor, that's 2. Local on the Northeast Corridor, so that's 3. Trains from the North Jersey coastline, that's 4, and you can steal a little bit. So it's also going to be some trains here that are mostly just there to provide more local frequency to places like Elizabeth and Rahway. So the point is that you have a train every 5 minutes on the shared sections of the local trunk. So that's 4. Raritan Valley Line is 5. It doesn't have that much ridership now, but that's because it doesn't go to Manhattan. That is going to change with Gateway. That's not a question. That's 5. 6 is the Morristown line. 7 is the Gladstone branch, which is absolutely not strong enough for a train every 10 minutes. Really, it's just about extra local frequency to these stations. Same as with what I said with the North Jersey coastline. It's not strong enough for 6 trains now. It's probably only strong for 4 here. But if you just run 6 trains an hour local, and then I guess if they get too empty, you just have two of them or three of them turn it Earth Amboy or something. And the so it's the same thing. It's 6 trains that are trains per hour that go to like Marstown and beyond. That's I think already present day frequency. 6 that in theory go to Gladstone. Gladstone is absolutely not built for that frequency. It's mostly single track, entirely electrified, but mostly single track. The Gladstone branch, fun fact, is the only line of New Jersey Transit other than the Northeast Corridor that is electrified to its end, because the Morristown line, the electrification ends at Dover. And you can define stuff past Dover as something different, but it's an extension of that line. And same thing with the North Jersey Coast line at Long Branch. So obviously you should electrify the rest for all the usual reasons, but anyway, 6 intercity, 6 express Northeast Corridor, 6 local Northeast Corridor, 6 North Jersey Coast is 24, 6, and it probably goes in the old tunnel, then the new tunnel would be Raritan Valley, Morristown, 6 trains that are nominally called Gladstone, probably only 2 or 3 of them actually go to Gladstone, the rest are at Summit for extra local service, and then 6 on the Montclair Boontown line. I don't know if it's enough, if it currently has enough ridership for that, but I mean it's already electrified, and it's mostly about local service to Montclair. I could see that happen. So it's 48 trains per hour already. Can you do more than 24 trains per hour through a 2-track regional rail track? Yes, but you should be wary about that. So it's possible, and I'm mentioning 4 branches on each of these, right? I'm mentioning 8 stopping patterns, each with 6 trains per hour. Well, it's like 4 branches. You should think of local and express if they drop to the same trunk as 2 branches, in effect. And if you do that, then I'm skeptical that you can squeeze a lot more. It's clearly possible, but I'm skeptical about how reliable it's going to be. Especially if it's going to be local and express on this line, which is a reminder, has 4 tracks. The local and express trains actually need to somehow bypass each other. Or the intercities need to bypass the express. This is not trivial. So it's not something that's that simple. So at 6 trains per hour in each of these, you can swing that. But if you're running more intercity traffic, then you might need to. First of all, you should 6-track everything. I mean, not literally everything. It shouldn't be a 6-track line, but you should 6-track the narrow. So there are 6 tracks around here in parts of Newark. The airport, I believe, is 6-track. Yeah. So it looks like 8 tracks. These are just right. So local, express, super express, express, local. So it's 6 tracks. There's also 6 tracks farther south around, I think around Linden and Rowway, and then there's a 4-track narrow through Elizabeth that should be fixed. And this is, by the way, where I talk about future-proofing before. You might want to do it early. And the issue is that Elizabeth has an annoying S-curve, which should be fixed. So you should build space for 6 tracks, and unfortunately even though they knew that they would need to fix this curve 20 years ago, they've built a lot of stuff in the last 20 years to it, this and this, that needs to, all of this needs to be knocked down. It's, I don't remember, I think this building, I think Union County College was $50 million. I guess all of this combined would be about 150, which is very high for land acquisition. This should be safe. The housing project should also be safe. And so when you do this, you might want to already future-proof and make sure that there's space for 6 tracks. To some extent, there already is. Like this bridge, I think might have enough space for 5. I'm not sure about 6. You might be able to tell from here. Like you just need to build this, but the approaches are there. So this is an example of where you're going to build with future-proofing, even if you're only building 4 and not 6 tracks. the real thing is that if you're doing, maybe you don't need it at 8, but certainly at 12 you would need probably dedicated high-speed tracks to New York City. So essentially, instead of just the existing tunnels and the Gateway Tunnel and whatever you're going to do just for regional trains, like Erie Atlantic, what I call in my various regional rail crayons, Line 5. Let me see if I have. It should be somewhere here. Is it concept or V3? Let's do concept. V3 is with another line that is. Yeah, so I mean this. I'm guessing just in terms of prioritization, Gateway is the same as what let's call it high speed rail, which again is defined as the priority level of New Haven to Kingston. This is a lower priority, this is a yet lower priority. And then maybe either the same as this, or same as line 7, which is in some of line. Again, it's going to be V3. It's going to be Regional Rail version 3. And I've displayed it on video before. This is line 7, the turquoise one. Is to also build something, and again, this is very crayony. As it says, this is something I can like see being planned. At construction costs that require reform but don't require setting people on fire. And so anyway, if you do it with high-speed trains getting their own dedicated tracks through Penn Station, then yeah, that is capacity-based planning, because you need that for higher capacity. This should be done again in conjunction. This probably is the same prioritization level as. Okay, so let's say it's new tunnels through here. It needs to be paired through new tunnels on the other side. They can be a new tunnel through the East River, something like this. They can go through Manhattan. The alignments are not terribly concerned, because all you need to know is that they start at Penn Station and they need to wend their way to New Rochelle. How much tunnel, it depends on how much you want, but probably you're going to tunnel to, I don't know, you're probably going to tunnel somewhere around here and then resurface if you have 4 tracks. Essentially it's a bypass of Hellgate more than anything. And, not Hellgate Line, which is the entire thing, of Hellgate Bridge. And so you want to, so if you do that, that's when you're going to do, at the same time, when you're going to do those extras, the extra capacity issues. Maybe you want to even do a little bit of 6 tracking on this line. I'm not sure. Probably not, because it's still going to be something only like 12 trains per hour. The regionals, or the express regionals, are also going to be only 12, and I mean the speed difference is not going to be that massive on this section, so you might want to eat that. But certainly it's where you're going to have like very extensive for tracking Boston to Providence. Maybe not everything, but again extensive enough that you can do 6, if not 8 trains per hour Boston to Providence. Because again, the point is to do 12 trains per hour south of New York. And so it's something. It's nearly probably in the same constellation. Probably also with. I don't want to say probably with full far tracking Baltimore to Washington, but possibly started at the same time to complete a little later, because these are tunnels in full far tracking Baltimore to Washington. And this also impacts Penn Station planning. So the issue with Penn Station planning is Penn Station. The question is what. The question is what are you going to do with it? So again, there are the things you do just to have good service. So you do want to have. So you do want to make sure that you can get tangential turnouts based on 1920s geometry, 1920s engineering, and 1880s, 1890s. That essentially means that instead of entering Penn Station, New York Penn Station, singular, station, at 15 miles an hour, you earn 24 kilometers an hour. You can squeeze, I think, 40 kilometers an hour 50 is aspirational, I think, without much more extensive reform. You also, at the same priority level, want to have, of course, not even at the same priority level, maybe even higher priority level, you want to have the station just have better user experience, so better signage. Is it signature signage? I think it's signage, right? Signal, but signage. I keep tripping on this word. So better signage. You want to make sure that trains. You want to make sure that the trains are reliable enough that they can make consistent tracks, so that the track number is printed on the ticket instead of making everyone scramble just before the train is announced. You want to increase the you want to increase the interoperability of the various operators. Even some through running. I want to say even some because through running gets much more important post and pre-gateway. And you want to also have so you want to have a train arrival board for everyone, not just separate ones for New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, and the LIRR. You want to have integrated ticketing machines. It's that kind of organizational integration that you need to do first, even before thinking of high speed. Not before thinking. You should think of high speed rail. The United States has been thinking about high speed rail for generations. Before building high speed rail. And you want to. So you want to start with just that. Again, fixing interlocking, fixing the UX. That saves you like a minute and a half in each direction, I think. Just not having that blanket speed limit. And I think it also lets you get away with shorter train dwells, but I'm not sure because I think the limiting factor to train dwells is that they restock the cafe there and not at the end. At the normal high speed rail level, it's at some point you need to start thinking about how to rebuild Penn Station. And again, there are different ways to do that. It depends on whether there are going to be 3 or 4 lines. Remember the crayon that I just put out there a moment ago? That I'm going to take forever to retrieve again? This one? Not actually forever. So you see that there are 3 lines through Penn Station. In my crayon I constantly call them, I have consistent coloring and I've kept it since I think I started crayoning this in 2012, 2013. The red line is the existing tunnel through Penn Station, and the southern half, I think it was the existing tunnel under the Hudson, and the southern half of the existing tunnels from the eastern is called line 1. Green is line 2, and this is supposed to be Gateway, but the actual alignment of Gateway is slanted and it's not as close to the old tunnels as depicted, which is a warning. And line 3 is the orange. Essentially it's a realignment of this section, which is real. It just goes through different tracks as partly single track. And this is this is existing tunnels under the East River that would go to the LIRR. And so if it's a 3-line station, it's 6 approach tracks. Essentially all of this build how modern train stations look like a Berlin Hauptbahnhof. Yeah. So you want to build with probably 2 platform tracks per approach track, so there will be 12-track station. The platforms would be massive. We're talking 15 meters wide. But if you're doing a full rebuild, remember this is not simple, simply paving over tracks. The station is not 24 tracks; it's 22 tracks. So a lot of tracks would need to be moved. Some of the tracks are not even that used because of certain issues with the interlocking. Some of which, essentially, a lot of it is just you remove Madison Square Garden. This is actually a priority to some extent because their operating license expires in June, and everyone says that it's going to obviously be renewed, but it's likely, but who knows? And if you remove this, you move them to somewhere else. I think there have been plans to move them to the block. You need 2 blocks for them to either move them to Javits, to move them somewhere around here, or to move them to move them to the block south of Macy's. So I guess it would be, like, this is Macy's, so I guess it would be this, maybe? I think the argument is that these are pretty big buildings, but apparently some of them are fully depreciated, is the idea. So if you manage, so essentially it's move this, knock this down. It's a tall building, but it's pretty depreciated at this point, as I understand it. And if you need high rises, and it's Manhattan, you need high rises. Turn this into high rises, like on Firma, not on the more and more rail tracks that they're trying to shove through the Penn Station expansion. So, so the point is that either you make this a 12-track station with a lot of modding, or a 16-track station, because remember, maybe with very high service levels, very, very high capacity, you need to have this be a separate tunnel. So it's going to be kind of a fourth line. What the heck? Okay. And then it's still going to be pretty wide platforms, but maybe not 15 meters, but 10 meters, 11 meters. Wide, but not so wide to the point that that you never have to worry about platform width as a capacity limit, and it's all going to be other things. So essentially the point is that Penn Station ground up remodeling is something that's useful, but it's also probably, if you think of it again in terms of like capacity priorities, it's probably a priority to just again, it's a priority for future proofing, especially because if you start cramming more things into it, the whole point of this is that you shut down tracks at a time to move things, and the more stuff you've built there, the harder it is. I'm tempted to say that this is not the same priority as Gateway. It obviously isn't. Gateway is more important, but probably, let's say, the same priority as maybe line 3, let's say. Like something that you would do while doing this realignment is you also knock down and start moving tracks. That's probably the best way to think about it. Again, line 3 and the consistent coloring, and again, there are two crayon maps there, one with line 7, one without, and they otherwise have the same colors. Like, you literally see the lines go over each other, like, like, I'm pretty sure that, like, I used the old one, which is the concept, as a base for version 3, which is why the curves all look the same. But yeah, so probably Penn Station, again, it's not the most critical thing, but it is, I think, kind of valuable to think how it should look. The annoying thing is that you probably also want to knock down Moynihan Station, but that is essentially forcing an admission of failure, and these are not the sort of people who admit failure. It's just people who do these like really weird moves that they think build legitimacy and do the exact opposite, because people then perceive them as people who never admit error. But anyway, so that's kind of the capacity planning. And I said I very deliberately start far from New York and then end into New York. And it will take questions. You can do it like maybe 2.5 hour stream. It's only going to be a couple of minutes if people have questions. We'll see. This is the perilous bit where I say, oh, we can be done in a few minutes, and then it takes another hour due to freewheeling questions. What's the lag? 11 seconds, okay. Yeah, Jamaica is very underrated. Oh, what do you mean for what purpose? For, like, Jamaica is a really good station, but what purpose do you mean it is underrated for? Oh, platform access. Yeah, Jamaica has very good platform access. Jamaica also has a very good transfer situation, kind of the opposite of Secaucus, where you need to do 2 level changes. I think it's up and down, and also go through fairgates twice to transfer, which is stupid, regardless of the fact that like it's like generally harder because it's a crossing station and on the same. And there's no cross-platform interchange there, but still, it's just being done poorly. But yeah, no, Jamaica's very good for me. It's just that Jamaica, it's really hard for trains to terminate to Jamaica from the west, only from the east. Is it more viable with the current track configuration? And also, like having intercity trains branch to either LAR main line or the Northeast Corridor is going to just muck more lines. Yeah, I mean, you could do it for regional turnarounds. I mean, yeah. It's just that if you do it, it's as I said, it's generally hard to do turnarounds on trains that come from the west. It's not easily set up for this. You would need to do a lot of reconstruction, and also you would have the intercity trains muck more. Oh, sorry. Like essentially, the issue with why I'm at this point skeptical of intercities hitting the LRR main lines. Just the point is to have the intercities interface with as little of the regional network as feasible, just because you do not want to impose German levels of reliability on it. German levels of reliability are terrible. And it's also, and someone's going to, oh, it's just about the schedule. No, it's about the passengers, remember. In Germany, we have 25% schedule padding. In France, which generally is less reliable on most things, like on the regional trains, it's 11% or 12%. So it's, and again, it should be 7%. So just think how much speed you're leaving on. Is the mainline west of Jamaica really that busy? Yes. And getting more so with east side access. Like I fully expect, and the thing is, the more, let me put the regional rail for a sec. The thing is, it's something that can be very easily made busier just because of, so the way I'm currently drawing it is the purple trains exist today up to Grand Central, so the through running thing is very crayon, but up from Grand Central to points east, that's east side access just open. With better service that exists and with some changes, I mean, it depends on to what extent there's a return to the office, but it looks like there's steadily a return to the office. This basically just clogs the entire express tracks. I mean, not clog, but still like 20 something trains per hour at the peak. Yeah, you can have intercities interface with that a little bit, but it is going to muck both kinds of trains. These are supposed to be local trains to Hempstead. The yellow line, the yellow line 5 is based on this tunnel, which is crayon, but is again, it's the sort of crayon that I can see. Like this almost happened. This was planned post 9/11. It's one of the things that would have happened if New York had slightly better construction costs. And if it doesn't happen, then essentially, I guess these trains, so Long Beach and Far Rockaway, keep terminating here. Montauk essentially becomes, Babylon, I guess, becomes another branch of the Orange, if you think about it that way, and just local trains here. The thing is, it's very easy to create more ridership here if you just have better service, like higher frequency all day and subway competitive, like not subway competitive, subway integrated fares. I mean, there are some impressively busy buses that are parallel that just feed the subway. Jamaica Center and Jamaica Station combined are very busy on the subway, so this is just going to be a lot of city ridership. For regional turnarounds, oh, I see what you mean. Are they turning at Boston Station, same in DC? Oh, or better to run? Ooh, really good question. This is a really good question. I would just turn at the main city station. You can do so. There have been plans with NSRL. The idea would be that you would build NSRL in Boston, and Amtrak would use it. I think it's mostly just Amtrak imperialism, the real reason. And so the idea is that Amtrak would not serve Central or North Station, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of NSRL, to be honest. Like, these are way more important than any of the suburban stations that they're going to hit. And it's all because, oh, we can only serve one city station. This is Boston. You're serving Back Bay already. So the idea is that they're going to go up to Woburn, Anderson, and then wherever. But the thing is, you can do that, yeah. But you're mucking the regional trains that make all these intermediate stops from South Station to Woburn, Anderson. I mean, from North Station to Woburn, Anderson, but with NSRL it would be from South Station to Woburn, Anderson. Um, and for what purpose? Like, yeah, there are jobs here on Route 128, but um, most of the things that get people to travel to Boston are not here. I mean, yeah, there's some here. It's not nothing. Um, but remember, most of the destination. I mean, again, look at where the hotels are. They're not. I mean, yeah, there are some here, but the hotels are mostly here, Back Bay, a little bit in downtown Boston, a bunch in Cambridge. Um, look where people are going. And if you look at where people are originating, it's just an office park. People don't originate here. Um, I mean, maybe they originate in our suburban region, but this is just one of 4 suburban lines, right? I mean, there's Fitchburg, Lowell, Haverhill, which might be part of Lowell, so one of 3, and then Eastern, so to Salem. So, so that's not that valuable. I mean, yeah, I get it, but it's less valuable than people think, and the same is true of the other side in DC. In DC, yeah, you can have trains go to Alexandria, um, but there's such a giant drop off in demand that it raises questions like why. If you're trying to serve Alexandria, it's so much more efficient to have every 16 car train turn here and then have have shorter trains doing DC to Virginia that stop at Alexandria. Um, these can be intercity trains to Richmond and so on, or these can be regionals. The only reason you're going to have intercities continue into Alexandria is if the intercities continue into not DC suburb Virginia. That is to say, if you have um, and then you probably would want to have good enough service that even those 16 car trains would be able to serve Richmond at decent frequency. And to be very clear, anything worse than a train every hour is not decent. Um, don't want to send DC trains all the time? Yeah, I do. And then, yeah, if it's part of the trains, if it's part of the system of high speed trains, then yeah, of course you do DC. Then then most likely have stops at Alexandria, um, at least on the locals, if not on every train. And then yeah, and then you have the question: do you serve Quantico? Do you serve Fredericksburg? I imagine everything stops at Richmond. Some trains divert to Hampton Roads. Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, it's fine if this is part of an intercity rail network, but if the intercity rail network ends in the DC region, it should end at Union Station and not at Alexandria, is my point. Don't they need platform capacity relief? No, why would they? I mean, certainly not. So think about it. If NSRL exists and all the regionals go there, or almost all the regionals go there, the intercities have a giant train station all to themselves. They don't need extra. Um, Washington Union Station is already has way more platforms than it needs. Um, and so no, they don't need platform relief. Um, they need 4-ish platforms for 4-ish platform tracks. I can see a world in which they need 6, but they probably just need 4. Remember that also that as the investment levels increase, the segregation between the intercities and the regionals also increases to the point that all that's left is maybe some short sections where it's just some express regionals that don't make any stops and are relatively controllable, or maybe not even that. And so the more you do that, the more reliable the intercities are, and this means that you can keep turning them on something like 4 platform tracks, whether it's 4 or 6 or 8 or 12 trains per hour. Just because the reliability levels are going to increase. I'm not, by the way, mentioning this because it's something where I'm just working on a rule of thumb of 7% timetable padding, but you might need to, if it's a very highly shared system. I don't even think that the 6 trains per hour between Haven 4 to Boston is that highly shared. But if it's that, and maybe you also don't build this bypass for some reason, the one around Portchester and Greenwich. And maybe you do a few other shortcuts, then maybe you can't even get away with 7% banding and need to do something like 10%. 7% is just Swiss standard again with a lot of traction, but also a lot of clever ways to prevent that from cascading the delays. Conversely, if it's a highly segregated system with no track sharing or with almost no track sharing, comparable to, let's say, the mini Shinkansen in Japan, you can in that case use the same pad factor that is used on the Shinkansen, including the trains that go mini Shinkansen in Japan, which is not 7% but 4%. Sure, no problem. Oh, you miss bagels. I haven't had a bagel. I should get a bagel. Maybe for dinner I should get a bagel. Good point. Thank you. Thank you, Connor. Are there other questions? I'm hearing buzz. No good bagels in the EU. Yeah. I love Europe, but there are certain things that I miss, that I am reminded of whenever I'm in New York. It's usually not the bagels. Like here, I think I've had mapo tofu 4 times. Like I've had mapo tofu 3 or 4 times already, and I've been here 10 days. 9 or 10. Yeah, I've been here about 9 days, and I think I've had mapo tofu 3 times. This is what I miss. Many other Sichuan dishes will be consumed. Do not worry. Yeah. Are there other questions before we geek out about how New York has amazing food? If you're okay spending $25 or $30 per meal. What's the lag factor? 10 seconds, 11 seconds, so yeah. Oh, ooh, Sani, thank you. Could proper high-speed rail possibly induce more demand than is available? Yeah, so certainly, I mean, the idea is that high-speed rail would just build up its own demand. Not in the induced demand in the sense of build and they will come. I mean, this is the Northeast. I mean, this is not, I mean, if you're expecting Turkish levels of YMBSM, forget about it, unfortunately. But even at, like, high but sub-Turkish levels of YMBSM, you're not, you're not going to turn New York into, like, a science fiction megacity of 150 million people. So we're talking induced demand, we're talking tighter linkages, which is just a fancy way of saying economic growth. So yeah, you can induce more demand, and the whole point is, yeah, maybe with a system built for 4 trains an hour north of New Haven, north of New York, and 6 south, will eventually induce enough demand that you need more. How can it induce, again, tighter linkages? It can also succeed to the point of making it much more politically viable to build more, because if this succeeds, let's say I'm promising to do this in 20 and it's done in 30, okay? I mean, yeah, I ran over budget, but they're currently talking about doing a lot less than this. That is to say, this at like an average speed of something like 140 kilometers an hour, not 200 something, for 117. So if this is done in 30, you know, let alone in an actual 20, then people see, ooh, America can do this. It's not like the California high-speed rail failure. Like, think about it. The failure of California high-speed rail to actually build something has a lot of Americans who were not Wendell Cox, they were not Randall O'Toole, they were not Robert Poole, they were not just anti-rail on principle, but they saw a rail project that many of them were excited about in 2008, 2009, 2010, and they saw it fail. I mean, Elon Musk is like terrible at this, terrible at everything involving that kind of transportation with his ideas about Hyperloop and boring. I mean, it's just a bundle of failure, but people believe that. Not because they believe the halo of Elon Musk. People started buying into that in people were mentioning that into 2013, when Elon Musk was this kind of supposed to be this genius, Iron Man type businessman, but he had a lot less halo than they had. I don't know if now because of his Twitter issues, but in, let's say, 2020. And people bought that partly it's not a word. People bought that partly because California high-speed rail visibly failed. And if this visibly succeeds, even if it does underperform expectations to some extent, first, so one way this can induce more traffic is political. That is to say, people want this DC to Richmond to North Carolina to Atlanta thing to be built, or New York to Albany. That would stress like Washington to New York to Albany, or Philly to Harrisburg, and then punch it also the mountains to Pittsburgh, and then to Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago. That's one way to induce more traffic as well, just growing the network because you see the initial line succeed. Networks, once the initial line succeed, build to their limit. They build not usually the capacity, the economic limit, the limit where they stop building when the lines are truly not economic, which means that there are people who are very fiscally conservative who will be okay with the first line and hate the later lines just because states build to the limit of economic feasibility as they collectively judge it, and fiscally conservative people by definition are more fiscally conservative than the average person, so their limit is less than that of the limit of the state, and that's fine. I mean, there are less economically conservative people who think that that in the current economic conditions, high-speed rail from Chicago to Denver would work. I mean, yeah, they're not going to be satisfied when it only goes as far as St. Louis or Kansas City, maybe, or something like that. I mean, so yeah, that would induce more traffic. And now you're asking any demand that would even be available. Yeah, that's harder to say. I mean, if you believe my formula and there are reasons not to, then this is going to be eventually 18 trains an hour, 16 or 18 trains an hour. Bear in mind, High Speed 2 is designed around that capacity, and it's going to be probably trains that are never going to make stops between New York and Philly at that point, just for capacity concerns, which is going to suck for Trenton, but not everything is about Trenton, I'm sorry. That would be something like 16-ish trains an hour, and then probably on the order of 16, where maybe 8 don't even stop at Philadelphia. They bypass to directly go to Harrisburg without the pinch, and then maybe 8 stop in Philadelphia and then go to DC and to the south. And it's something that's going to be very complex that way. And again, this is only if you believe a certain like ridership screen that I have that does have a tendency to overrate long distance ridership. Trained on the Shinkansen. Like, it's okay at, let's call it the most common high-speed rail range, let's call it 3 hours, 4 hours out of Tokyo, which is what I train it on. If it's beyond that, then then the model overpredicts ridership. And all of the idea that maybe there's going to be 16 trains an hour New York to Philly assumes quite a lot of demand New York all the way to Detroit, Chicago, points past Chicago. Cleveland is not that speculative. It's like 3.5-ish hours, but then Cincinnati, things like that. New York, Cincinnati, things like that. But anyway, yeah. So the answer is it's yes, but I doubt it. Like, it hasn't happened in Japan, for example. Could it happen in Germany? Actually, it might. Like up the Rhine, if everything is high-speed rail, whereas right now, not enough things are to make it a long high-speed line. So it's like Amsterdam or Rotterdam through Köln and then up the Rhine. That might be, but who knows? Like, this is not the stream about cross-border EU rail. Anyway, are there other questions before I stop this? It's going to be almost a 3-hour recording. That awkward moment when I'm waiting for people to ask the last question. Always happens. Alright. Looks like there's nothing, so yeah, let's end this. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for watching a rather long video. And I will see you again. I can't tell right now if it's going to be in 3 days or in a week. And I'll see you with another topic on with another video on this or a related topic. So thank you, and ciao ciao. And thanks for everyone who asked questions. They were very good questions. I did need to think quite a lot about them. So.